Even the gods and goddesses of Olympus needed a day off. Sometimes they needed time away from the constant bickering and never-ending controversies of their family. On one such day, Wisdom and Moon found themselves discovering a hidden gem within the city that never slept, and meeting a familiar blonde knucklehead with a penchant for the color orange. Maybe the owner could create some Halloween-styled food for us. It's Persephone's favorite holiday, so I can only imagine what kind of delicacies the mortal will create. A bubble of excitement sparked to life in his chest, and Hades could only wish the spring and summer months would pass by quickly. In the middle of the afternoon, and making small talk between bites, Melino's gaze would repeatedly return to Naruto, watching him quietly as he continued his day. As impressive as his culinary skills were, her interest in the mystery that revolved around him increased. To have such a powerful and emotional connection with the souls of the underworld was unusual. Just who is this guy? A mystery presented itself, and Melino intended on finding some answers. Prepare your bows. The voice belonging to Zoe Nightshade, Lieutenant of Artemis, and veteran member of the Hunters of Artemis, carried itself across the pine grove deep inside Forest Park. She stood to attention off to the side of the hunters' camp, her hands clasped together behind her back like a drill sergeant. Her dark eyes were focused and emotionless, scanning over the group of young girls that stood in a single file line. Each girl was upright, their feet shoulder-width apart, and toes pointing in 90 degrees at the target dummies set up 30 meters away from them. All of the inanimate objects looked like pincushions, dozens of arrows sticking out from them. Girls all dressed identical, with a silver parka jacket and green camouflage pants. Their hair was all braided, with some flicking over their shoulder and others resting along their spine. Yes, Lieutenant, like they trained for. Each girl kept a relaxed grip on the bow handle and narked their arrow with their other free hand. Remember to position your fingers on the string with the index finger above the arrow, and keep the middle and ring finger below it. Following her instructions, the girls all did so in unison. Do not grip the arrow with your fingers. Pull back the string using your back muscles, not your arm, Zoe warned. Pull back until your index finger is under your chin and the string touches nose and lips. Once you're comfortable, use your dominant eye to line up the shot. The girls did as they were told and steadily began lining up their shot with the dummies. It took a matter of seconds before Zoe was pleased with what she saw. The newest members of the hunt had come a long way in the last couple of months. This time a month ago, she was still showing members like Eloise and Lucy the proper stance when preparing to fire an arrow. Relax your grip on the string and allow your fingers to slip backwards. After shooting, maintain your body position until I tell you. Ignoring the tickle on the tip of her nose from the chill, she stood still as the familiar sounds of arrows whooshing through the air reached her ears. A smile tugged on the corners of her mouth. Was there a better sound in the world than arrows gliding through the air? If there was, she didn't know what it was, nor did she care for it. Gazing across the archery field the hunters temporarily created for themselves, she examined the training dummies now filled with arrows. 2 in the left lung, 1 in the shoulder, 1 to the kidney, 1 that would have sent the target's intestines spilling across their lap. The final arrow hit its target directly in the right eye, with 0 chance of survival. Not bad at all. Nodding, Zoe walked onto the field and faced the waiting hunters. They were all still in their shooting positions, waiting for her to give the order to drop their stances. Okay girls, silence hung over them as they eagerly awaited her verdict, though their faces gave nothing away. Good job. Drop your stances. A sigh of relief rung through the field, and Zoe was forced not to roll her eyes as half of the lineup dropped to the ground. Their arms and legs splayed out like a star. The others remained standing, though their shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Ah, my fingers are killing me. Who knew shooting arrows could be so exhausting? I've got blisters on my blisters. If they thought that was bad, then they have no idea what they've signed up for. Zoe didn't bother turning around, recognizing the voice of the only member of Artemis's hunt whose tenure expanded past her own. Whereas Zoe's tenure with the hunt was over 2,000 years, Phoebe's was even longer, somewhere around 2,500 years if the ginger-haired hunter's count was correct. I hope they know that I won't heal injuries as trivial as this. I'm sure they know. As hunters of Artemis, it's expected of them to be aware of what injuries dictate the attention of our medic. As a daughter of Apollo and one as old as Phoebe was, there wasn't many whose knowledge in the healing arts surpassed the larger girl. Though there was no love between the daughter of Apollo and the god of the sun, there was no denying the demigod had inherited her father's aptitude for medicine, which included her inheritance of Apollo's vitikinesis abilities. The ability to manipulate the healing process was a skill few children of the sun god were lucky to inherit, and the demand for such individuals was high wherever you went. To this day, Phoebe was the only one Zoe was aware of who was still alive. None of the sun god's current batch of children at Camp Halfblood had yet to prove themselves capable of the skill. I've made sure to drill that into their heads, I have no doubt. Clapping her hands, Zoe drew the attention of the 6 hunters back to her. Pick yourself up, girls. Training might be over, but the day isn't, and I know you still have chores around the camp to complete. A groan rang out between the girls and forced the lieutenant of the hunt to narrow her eyes. I wasn't asking if you wanted to or not. It's that, or bathing the wolves in the nearby creek. Suffice to say, the threat of bathing the wolves was enough for the 6 to backpedal from their groans and made a beeline for the camp a short distance away. A snort came from Phoebe, who shook her head. Sometimes, I wonder about the girls Milady allows in joining the hunt. I don't remember Atlanta, or Alessandra, or anyone from the old day groaning about such trivial things. It's expected for the members of the hunt to pull their weight, and not force their sisters to carry their workload for them. It's like girls from the current era can't do anything but groan about every little thing. Zoe couldn't help but agree. The girls of the modern world were vastly different from the ones that existed in the old day. Back in ancient Greece, humanity needed to learn vital skills to survive. Men and women needed to know how to hunt for their food, whether that be tracking a deer or fishing in a nearby creek. They needed to know how to forage for medicinal herbs and explain what made one deadly and made the other life-saving. Build a fire, stitch together their clothing, learn to wield a weapon of some kind. Every day was a battle, and those who got through another day could enjoy the small victory of surviving longer than another. Then again, she could also accept that the way of life was vastly different. The world had grown in a way that no one could have imagined, not even the gods. No one could have expected things like healthcare, supermarkets, and televisions would ever exist. While it was nice to have these luxuries in life, Zoe felt they made the new girls that joined the hunt lack a drive that hunters like herself and Phoebe possessed. The world has changed. It's not the same one we once knew, ain't that the truth? Arriving back to the hunt's latest campsite, the lieutenant and medic stood in the center and watched as the hunters of Artemis carried out their chores. More than a dozen silver tents were set up in the shape of a crescent moon, with a fire set up in the middle with logs big enough to seat 5 or 6 girls to huddle on in the evening. Like most evenings, the girls would spend their downtime sitting around the campfire, a giant bag of s'mores courtesy of Lady Hester to share getting passed around. If she was lucky, she could get her hands on 2, maybe 3 before they all disappeared. The hunt didn't have many luxuries, but Zoe counted the treats as one of the few. At this moment in time, the hunt numbered precisely 3 dozen girls, ranging from the ages of 12 to 16. The most populous the lieutenant remembered the hunters of Artemis reaching was around 50, but that had been years ago. That was back in the old day when nymphs and other beings of nature would join them in their adventures. These days, nymphs stuck to their natural environment, and often the hunt was comprised with little more than demigods and clear-sighted mortals. Their number always fluctuated. Some would leave willingly, having fallen into the pitfall trap of falling in love. Others would break their vows and take a dishonest approach. As kind as Lady Artemis was for giving young girls somewhere to call home, she didn't tolerate her trust being abused and broken. Some though gave their lives for the hunt, and their souls rested together eternally in the underworld. As grateful as Zoe was for her long life, the sadness of watching friends die never lessened. Before she could get lost in her thoughts, a light appeared from the center tent. Across the camp, everyone stopped what they were doing as the light dimmed, and the zip to the center tent began opening up. The moment Artemis appeared, everyone in the camp took a knee, their heads lowering as they showed respect to their patron and adoptive mother. As she often would, the goddess of the moon reverted to her 13-year-old form, the average age of her hunters. "Milady, welcome back," Zoe greeted, being the first of the girls to get back to her feet and approach the Olympian. One by one, the girls around the camp followed suit and returned to their chores and duties. Phoebe copied Zoe's actions and approached the auburn-haired goddess. "Zoe, Phoebe," Artemis replied, smiling at her veteran and most trusted huntresses. "Training with the girls was a success, I hope." "Yes, milady. I'm happy to say none of the girls missed the training dummies this morning, and I saw no visible flaws in their stances." "Good. As always, you have done a splendid job with the recruits." When she wasn't around, it was Zoe's job to keep the girls on their toes. The last thing Artemis wanted during their breaks between hunts was the girls becoming complacent. The newer girls, in particular, needed to keep training until everything felt like second nature. "I trust none gave any attitude." "None, milady. I have ensured they know what will happen if they do not follow orders. It was safe to say no matter how respected the lieutenant of the hunt was amongst her sisters, there was a healthy amount of fear when it came to the veteran huntress. Glad to hear it. Quietly watching the exchange, Phoebe frowned when she noticed something off about the goddess's appearance. "Milady," she motioned to the corners of her mouth. "You have something around your mouth." Did the goddess have crumbs around her mouth? And flecks of icing? The red-haired daughter of Apollo recognized the residue instantly, having seen Artemis devour an entire tray of cookies courtesy of Lady Hestia on many occasions. The goddess of the moon thought no one was looking when she swept through the sugary treats, but in reality, they couldn't help but gawk in wonder at their patron's extreme sweet tooth. Embarrassment consuming her, Artemis swiftly turned around and hurriedly wiped away the crumbs from around her mouth. The pair could hear her mumbling beneath her breath, something about chalking out the stupid blonde when she saw him next, and how dare he refuse to tell her she had food left over on her face. Was she talking about Apollo, or maybe Aphrodite? Neither knew of anyone else who could get such a response from the Olympian. Blinking like a pair of owls, Zoe and Phoebe looked at each other silently, before turning back to Artemis. "Is everything all right, milady?" "Yes, yes, everything is fine." "Were those crumbs around your mouth?" "Cake crumbs?" Yes they were. I treated myself to a piece of cake earlier," the goddess admitted. "It was delicious. You know how I get with sweet treats. The whole world disappears, I see." Zoe's face morphed into a frown. "May I ask where you disappeared to?" "I don't remember you mentioning where your intended destination was." She didn't want to say anything before, but recently, the lieutenant of the hunt had noticed her Olympian patron and adoptive mother disappearing more frequently than usual. Often Artemis would leave her in charge of the hunters when she needed to attend a meeting of the Olympian Council, or if the goddesses were convening for one of their meetups. Often, their goddess would meet up with Lady Athena and spend sisterly time together, and the hunters were all for it. Lately, these visits were becoming more frequent. Not only that, but Artemis would also go for hours at a time, sometimes the whole afternoon. Beforehand, Zoe wouldn't have said a word. She would have done her duty and kept her nose out of her lady's business. However, this was the second time this week Artemis vanished without telling someone from the hunt where she was going. She wanted to bite her tongue, but Zoe hoped her fearless leader wouldn't be insulted by her curiosity. "I went to a cafe in West Village." "Oh, that was easy." "The West Village? It's one of the districts in New York, I think," Phoebe added, though her face looked confused like Zoe's. "I'm not big on the layout when it comes to the concrete jungle. Give them a week in the forest rather than an hour in a city like New York." New York was too populated for either of their likings. Too many people, and not enough room to move. Not to mention, the city that never slept was full of men. Yuck. The thought made them want to vomit. There weren't enough arrows in the world to poke them full of holes. Moving back to the topic at hand, Zoe squeezed her hands together in front of her. "Is there something special about this place, milady?" It was special if it caught Artemis's attention. "Honestly, Zoe, it's become one of my favorite places recently." Clapping her hands loudly together, she drew the attention of every hunter at camp. "Which is why I would like to make an announcement." It took half a minute before every young girl in the Hunters of Artemis were gathered around the moon goddess. "I know we've only been here a few days, but I'd like to announce we'll be on the move again tomorrow." The announcement made a noticeable impact as the hunter looked at Artemis in surprise. "Are we really, milady?" one of the hunters from the back row asked. "That's right, Miranda." "Are we going on a new hunt?" another asked, and Artemis identified the person who spoke as Lisa, a member of the hunt for over 200 years. "What are we hunting next, milady? Is it the Minotaur?" "No. Let's go after the Manticore." "The Manticore? We did that last year. There's no way it's reformed already. How about a real challenge, like the Nemean lion?" "Nah. Let's chase after the two-meshan fox. It's been over a century since we last saw it. I say we look for a Cyclops, a Draken." "No. The Hydra." Girls, settle down," Artemis laughed, failing from keeping the smile off her face. Their eagerness to chase after monsters and sent them on a one-way trip to Tartarus was admirable. It made her swell with pride at their bravery to face such creatures in combat. "Your eagerness is admirable, but we won't be hunting after anything. At least, not for another week." The faces of her hunters dropped, and some pouted. Even Zoe and Phoebe looked disappointed they wouldn't get to slay any monsters. "Oh, then what are we doing?" This time, it was Artemis's turn to hide her excitement. "Well, I thought since it's been a successful year of monster hunting so far, and to celebrate gaining new sisters into the hunt, I would treat you all to the best hot chocolate in the world. I'll even throw in some of those delicious cookies I brought back with me a month ago." the boxes of baked goods the blonde owner had provided her with before Hermes' little prank had gone over famously with her hunters. Even Zoe had been unable to help herself and binged half a dozen cookies within a minute of opening the box. Really, excited chatter broke out amongst the hunters. When their lady treated them, she went all out. They all remembered the box of goodies Artemis had brought back to the camp with her, and how big of a hit they were. That's right. However, it does mean we'll be heading into the city. The establishment I've been visiting is in the West Village of Manhattan. She noticed the faces of her hunters sour somewhat. Her hunters were not keen on cities, though would push that inside when it came to hunting a monster. You might feel this is out of the blue, but I hope you come to enjoy this place as much as I do. It provides a warm and safe atmosphere that I'm sure you'll all enjoy. The owner of the Fox's Den is a good person. Do they make cakes, milady? The best you'll ever taste. My sister, Persephone, and my lord uncle have visited too. Hades left with a smile on his face. The lord of the underworld and ruler of the dead smiled. The ruling thought in all the hunters' minds was how it was even possible. The few that had seen the god of the underworld looked like he never cracked a smile in his life. Before now, they weren't sure he knew how to smile. Whoa, whoever this woman is, she must be one accomplished chef to gain such attention. I, for one, am excited. Zoe's words made Artemis smile and nodded at her lieutenant as she and every other hunter all bowed to Artemis in thanks. So loyal were her hunters, and forever grateful to the kindness she gave them. However, before she could get too excited, she noticed an issue with Zoe's statement. I should clear something up. Artemis waved her hands in front of her, in a nonchalant-like fashion. The owner of the cafe is not a woman. The excitement came to a sudden halt. Not a woman, that's right, but milady, that would mean, Phoebe asked, before trailing off into silence. Slowly, Artemis nodded and kept a close eye on the facial expressions of each girl. Some were shocked, and others had their jaws hanging from their mouth. Her older hunters, like Zoe and Phoebe, wore expressions of frosty indifference and disgust, and their eyes spoke volumes, despite no words coming out of their mouth. They all had their reasons for their dislike or hatred towards men, but she hoped they were willing to give Naruto a chance as she did. This could take some convincing, she thought, before sighing as chaos erupted within the hunter's camp. Not long now, Naruto thought, his arms crossed against his chest as he looked out through the glass window of the fox den. The inside of the fox's den was empty apart from himself, with the last customer leaving nearly an hour ago. The closed sign was visible on the door, but the inside spoke the opposite with all the lights still on. Artemis doesn't strike me as someone who shows up late. The auburn-haired woman had been visiting him more often than usual, and the last time she visited, which was 2 days ago, she came to him with a request. Please, keep the fox's den open later than usual and let me bring my girls with me. I'd like them to try the amazing food. He saw no problem with that and was quick to say yes. He liked the auburn-haired woman, and their chats when she visited never failed to make him smile. In a way, she reminded him a little of himself. She worked tirelessly to make young women feel safe, and give them the strength to stare cruelty and abuse in the face and give them an ass-kicking. If he could help out and put a smile on their faces for one evening, then he would give it his best shot. Though, she did say not to get my hopes. These girls aren't fond of guys. Her warning rang through his head. What level they hated guys was uncertain, but he had an inkling of an idea. Fond might not be a strong enough word for it. If it was how he was picturing it, then he might have his work cut out for him. Nonsense. You're Naruto Uzumaki. You can get through to everyone if you work hard enough. Despite his age and his weariness to the world, he was still a spring chicken at heart. His belief in hard work and possessing the guts to persevere wasn't snuffed out yet. His will of fire was still burning and thought it wasn't as bright as it once was. He could feel it within himself. His goal was to make these girls smile, and by God, nothing was going to get in his way. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he regretted it. From the corner of his eye, a figure sat 3 tables down from where he stood. They were dressed head to toe in a dark, almost muddy green robe that churned and shifted, and left little skin revealed. The robe swept around the figure's feet and covered their arms down to the tips of their fingers. Not a single feature was visible thanks to a veil made of dust and sand, tucking her hair away from view, but it was clear the figure was that of a woman. Only one feature was visible for him to see. The eyes. You, he thought, looking at her from the corners of his eyes. She took many forms over his lifetime and was quick to recognize her current state. Focusing on his senses and reaching out around the area, he let out an uncharacteristic grunt. You're not here. You're just a figment of my imagination. Clenched at his sides, he felt his fingernails close to breaking the skin of his palm. The figure didn't say anything back to him. Instead, all the woman did was look at him with condescending eyes. From the way the skin shifted and crinkled around her eyes, he knew she was smiling beneath her veil. He could picture it in his head, and it took every ounce of willpower for the old shinobi not to power up a Rasengan and drive it through her form. Leave, I won't ask again. He closed his eyes and took soothing breaths to steady himself. Half a minute later, when he opened his eyes and looked back to the corner of the room, she was gone. A sigh of relief escaped his mouth, and he leaned on the window with forehead resting against his forearm. Thank God. The last thing I need is picturing that woman tonight of all nights. It didn't matter where he went in the world. That woman tended to follow him wherever he went, whether in reality or his mind. Shaking the moment off, he pulled himself together when he sensed a large group of individuals heading straight for him a few blocks over. There were 36 heading towards him, all of whom had connections to nature. They were similar to what he sensed from nymphs, but at the same time, different in the sense that they felt more hostile. Wood nymphs felt to him like peace-wielding hippies, wanting to spread the love for the good of the forest. This group, on the other hand, felt like warriors of the forest ready to protect it against invaders who sought to harm it with anything pointy they could find. Here they come, he thought, before making any last preparations. I don't like this, Phoebe muttered, walking a step behind Zoe as they led the procession of hunters through the streets of New York. As ordered by Artemis, the hunters had relocated the following morning and set up a new camp in the center of Central Park. The campsite was concealed from mortals with the mist, thanks to the actions of Chelsea, a daughter of Hecate. Before leaving their camp, the goddess had ordered them to leave behind their weapons, 1 because she promised them safe travel to the fox's den, and 2, she didn't want any of her livelier hunters to get any ideas concerning their host. Though disappointed, the girls complied, despite how naked they felt without their bows and hunting knives. Even their clothing was different. Though the theme was still silver and natural forest colors, the girls looked more like a group of regular young women, instead of monster hunting, semi-immortal huntresses. Zoe made a TSK sound with her mouth, but couldn't help agreeing with her comrade and friend. She wasn't looking forward to being in the presence of some man, even if, according to her leader, he made the best hot chocolate and cake in the world. It was hard for Zoe to believe anyone was that good, much less some mortal man. She would have to see it and taste it to believe such a thing. I'm not looking forward to it either, but this is what Lady Artemis has asked of us. It's a treat for the hunt, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like one. Remind me again why Lady Artemis is meeting us there later. It seemed strange that the goddess of the moon wasn't traveling with them. Often, Artemis had to rein them in where they wanted to get creative when a male walked past them. Then again, the Olympian was responsible for the abundance of jackalopes throughout the North American continent. Either way, even without their weapons, the hunters was adept in hand-to-hand combat when needed. It wasn't hard to take down a man. One swift kick to the junk was usually all it took. Gods, Phoebe loved kicking guys in the junk. As Our Lady stated before she left, she will be joining us later with Lady Athena. They had a meeting with Lord Zeus earlier this evening. Zoe eyed Phoebe. You know she can't turn her father down, I guess. Zoe patted her friend on the shoulder and looked behind them to check the rest of the hunt was still following, and none had wandered off. I think we're closed. Lady Artemis said we would know it when we see it. She says it stands out against the other buildings. What does that mean? She shrugged. I have no idea. I guess we'll know once we see it. Are we there yet? No. Zoe looked back and stared at the hunter that spoke. Don't start that again, Tracy. We get there when we get there. Huffing, one of the hunters crossed their arms and pouted. Fine. Walking through the West Village, it didn't take long for them to arrive at their destination. Like Artemis told them earlier, it stood out, but not for the reasons they had imagined. They were picturing some kind of sign with neon lights. They weren't expecting to see a building the brightest shade of orange imaginable. Even in the dark, the street lamp did a perfect job is displaying the outside of the building. Oh, gods, please tell me that's not the place we're going to. It was Phoebe who spoke, voicing the sentiments of every girl in the hunt. Despite not being typical girly girls, even they had to gawk at the bold choice of color. Why would someone do such a thing? Zoe wanted to agree, thinking there had to be some kind of mistake. There was no way their Lady Artemis would visit such a place. Alas, when Zoe spied the sign hanging over the doorway, her feelings sank. I fear it is, she muttered, before taking a deep breath and gathering her strength. Come on, let's get this over with. An audible groan resonated from the hunters, but together, they followed their lieutenant. There were few cars in the street that evening, and crossing the road had been a piece of cake for the group of 36 girls. They got strange and curious looks coming from some of the passers-by, but a collective glare from all the girls quickly sent them on their way. The last thing they needed this evening was to be stared at by strange men. They might not have their weapons, but anything pointy, be it a plastic spoon, could be a weapon in their hands. "Okay ladies, here we go. Best behavior," Zoe reminded them and pushed the door open. A familiar jingle ran through the air as the warmth of the inside engulfed her. Like many before her, she couldn't help feeling like being cocooned in a blanket. Before long, the familiar aroma of freshly made hot chocolate tickled her nose. Only seconds to being inside the fox's den, Zoe Nightshade found herself trying not to unconsciously licking her lips. Behind her, the other hunters all had a similar experience, though some were more vocal than others. "Wow, smell that. That smells heavenly. Maybe this place won't be so bad after all. Look at the tables." The voice prompted all the girls to look as they made their way inside. On every table, multiple cups of hot chocolate were waiting for them, each with a small mound of whipped cream sitting on the surface. A bonus, the girls spied rainbow sprinkles on the whipped cream, along with 2 small pieces of gingerbread sitting on the saucer. If that wasn't enough, in the middle of each table, a tray filled with bite-sized desserts were waiting for them, sitting neatly in rows of 7. One of the hunters stepped forward and looked down at the tray. "So cute," she muttered, letting her eyes scan each one. "There's so many here. There's carrot cake, red velvet, coconut, Victoria sponge, chocolate, coffee." She stopped at the last one. The last bite-sized cake was cream-colored, with a drizzle of dark amber sauce. Licking her lips, she delicately picked it up and threw it in her mouth, just as Zoe was about to stop her. "Why the hunter groaned out, making the rest of the girls stare at her in surprise. "Oh my god, girls, you have to try these. I've never tasted anything this amazing before. Get over here." She ushered them over, and one by one, some of the girls followed suit. They each mimicked her actions, and moments later, the girls all started to gush over the food. The tray, filled with treats, slowly started vanishing as the girls grabbed anything they could get their hands on. The more subdued hunters watched their sisters turn into animals as they reached for the sweet treats and slowly made their way to the other tables. Zoe led them past, idly ducking out of the way from a stray elbow, trying to appear more civilized than the younger hunters. The experienced hunters split into groups of 4, taking a table between them and took their seats. Sitting down, Zoe found herself sitting with Phoebe, Kellen, and Amaya. Kellen had been with the hunters of nearly 300 years, while Amaya joined barely a century ago. Despite her youth compared to the rest of the table, she was a formidable warrior, working her way up the ladder before becoming one of their best fighters. "So, who wants to go first?" Phoebe asked, taking her mug of hot chocolate. She could deny it looked and smelled amazing. She didn't want to voice a compliment to something a male made, but the smell was whetting her appetite more than the ones Lady Hestia would make them when she visited. Such a thought was ludicrous. The treats and beverages Hestia made for her family were legendary. "Perhaps we can all go together," Kellen replied, mimicking her senior comrade's actions. "It didn't look poisoned, and it sure didn't look like someone has spiked it with something nasty." As someone who sadly had been on the receiving end of a spiked drink back in the day, the huntress would be on her guard if offered something by a member of the other sex. Taking deep breaths, one by one, the 4 women brought their cups to their mouths. They took one last look at each other before letting the hot drink funnel its way into their systems. The result was instant as their eyes widened as if a unicorn farting rainbow and sprinkles from its behind appeared before them. A chopped gasp came out from Phoebe, and before the robust girl could realize what she was doing, she was necking the whole drink down her throat. Next to her, Kellen and Amaya weren't any better, with Amaya covering the top of her face as she took delicate sips. The dark-haired girl wanted to savor her drink. Kellen was in the same boat as Phoebe, with drops of hot chocolate splashing against her silver jacket and leaving a trail down her chin. Beneath the table, Zoe's hand clenched. She hadn't taken another sip, but her body wanted nothing more than to take another swig. She didn't want to praise a man, much less a mortal man. Gods, it tasted so good. The other tables were in similar states, while the younger hunters on the other side of the room had moved from one table to another, picking away at the tray of mini cakes. Speaking of the mini cakes, Zoe's gaze traveled to the tray sat in the middle of the table. For the lieutenant of the hunt, her gaze drifted to the coconut cakes. Only a handful of people were aware of her weakness to anything remotely coconut flavored. To her, nothing could beat the taste, and had long conversations with her patron during the evening when it was only the 2 of them sitting around the campfire. If she could, she would lather every item of food with coconut. In her mind, It made everything all the sweeter. It was perhaps the only thing from her father she was proud to inherit. Gulping hard, the other girls watched as Zoe reached out and plucked one of the coconut-flavored mini cakes from the tray. She brought it up to her face, looking it over to make sure nothing looked like it didn't belong. It wasn't only drinks that could get spiked. A moment passed, and the veteran hunter decided to bite the bullet. Taking one delicate bite, the others watched as her mouth went into action and chewed on the sweet treat. Within moments, an explosion of coconut ran rampant over her tastebuds, forcing the huntress to slump in her chair. Everyone in the room looked at her. Her expression started to morph, and the girls watched as their lieutenant internally tried to fight against expressing a look of pure joy. In the struggle, her face contorted into a look one related with when sat on the toilet. I thought I heard people out here." The room stopped what they were doing and turned to the swinging door behind the counter, carrying a large tray of freshly baked cookies, which the girls all noticed and unconsciously licked their lips over. The blonde appeared from the kitchen with his usual smile. "You must be Artemis's girls." He tried not to laugh when he saw their faces. Not one of them didn't have crumbs or chocolate staining their faces. Ignoring the overload of goodness, Zoe swallowed her coconut mini cake and changed the expression on her face. She wouldn't let this man see how much she enjoyed the sweet treat. A mask of frosty indifference returned to her face, one that was mimicked by the rest of the hunters. They took in the man's appearance, and couldn't help noticing how much like a child of Apollo he looked. Phoebe, in particular, leveled him with a frostier glare. Despite being a child of Apollo, Phoebe held no love for her demigod and godly siblings. Lady Artemis told us he wasn't a demigod, but still, Zoe thought, straightening her back as the man walked around the counter. He carries the features of a spawn of the sun. Their eyes briefly followed the tray of cookies as he put them down on the counter, and leveled them all with a bright smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Artemis has told me a lot about you girls, and I was pleased to hear she was bringing you all to visit." His eyes traveled across the room, appearing to Zoe that he was searching for someone. "Speaking of Artemis, where is she? I thought she was bringing you all here." Seeing his confusion, Zoe broke the frosty silence that hung over the hunters. "Lad, Miss Artemis," she corrected herself, remembering her lady informing her of the story he created for the mortal, "will be joining us later." She had family matters to attend to first. "She will be arriving later on with La Miss Athena." His mouth formed an O shape, but nodded nonetheless. He walked across the room, weaving his way past the tables until he stood in front of the table Zoe sat around. He looked at Zoe, his eyes running over her, and tilted his head when the huntress narrowed her eyes at him and felt her sisters level him with frostier glares than before. Though her weapons were back at the camp, she was already visualizing what she could use to batter the blonde's face. She had a couple of options: the mug, the tray the cakes were on, her chair. She could flip the chair over with her foot and break one of the legs off. "Where are you going?" Melano heard, her face pointing in the direction that led towards Elysium. The souls that came to the underworld divided into 3 sections, with Elysium, the fields of Asphodel and the fields of punishment stationed next to one another like 3 separate islands. Elysium consisted of a valley surrounded by walls, a gated community from which one could hear laughter and the smell of barbecue. The path that led towards Elysium was a golden brick road that started from the Judgment Pavilion and ran through the center of the underworld. On the left was a black brick road that led to the fields of punishment, and to the right was a red brick road that led to the fields of Asphodel. All souls had to go down one of these roads, but for today, the only one she was interested in was the one that led to mortal paradise. Ever since she visited the Fox's Den with her father, and met Naruto Uzumaki, the blonde mortal had been on her mind night and day, not in the romantic sense, but in the sense that he was a puzzle that needed solving. His feelings and connections towards several souls that resided deep within Elysium was something she couldn't shake, and she needed to find out what was going on. She never felt threads connected to souls as old as the ones he possessed. No other mortal in the world had anything close, and it only deepened the mystery. What made him special? Her father had no idea she was here, and neither did Thanatos. However, despite their absence, the womanly voice behind her had been expected. Turning around, the goddess of ghosts did not appear surprised when a set of vivid green eyes, reminiscent of Greek fire, stared at her in idle curiosity. Hecate was one of the most bizarre goddesses within the Greek pantheon, and one of the few that had been around longer than her father and the other elder Olympians. While technically born a Titan, she was an integral part of the system that ran the world, and the one that created and maintained the barrier that kept their world and the mortal world separate. Without her witchcraft and the mist, the world would look very different from the one they knew. dressed in a chiton of green silk to match her eyes and dark hair cut into a bob. The goddess of witchcraft stared at her, waiting for an answer. I have a matter I need to attend to in Elysium. It's nothing serious, but it's something I would like to finish off sooner rather than later. The answer wasn't enough to satisfy the older goddess, who took one step closer to the daughter of the Dark One. Is your father aware of this matter? She asked with her face a mask void of emotions. Melano thought she was good at appearing expressionless, but Hecate practically invented the look. You know he does not approve of any god or goddess entering one of the fields without his knowledge. He gets moodier than normal when someone goes behind his back within his domain. It's not as bad as his brothers, but it's still quite terrifying. As someone who could move between the domains of the big three, the goddess of magic was well versed with how each son of the Titan King ran their respective kingdoms and domains. The one thing they all had in common was their tempers when it came to people going behind their back. It was a headache for all involved. He doesn't. It's a matter not worth father's time. I don't want to bother him with something as meaningless as this, she replied, trying to dampen Hecate's curiosity. It won't take long. What does it involve? Hecate replied. Just stuff involving a silly little mortal, that's all. I think one might be trying to escape from Elysium. Why would any mortal soul be trying to escape from Elysium? Why do mortals try and do anything these days? They are so bizarre to understand in the modern world. They're nothing like they used to be back in the older days. Back in the time of swords and sandals, the goddess of magic didn't refute her claims. Mortals in recent years were very different from the ones that used to populate the earth. For instance, few believed in magic these days, resulting in a vast majority of the world's population to forget about her very existence. Most don't even know her name anymore. Only a loyal following of Wiccans, or wannabe modern witches as she called them, understood her importance in the world. The followers of Hecate ran all through the world centuries ago, but with the rise of the church and magic labeled as the work of the devil, magic was little more than a tool for fictional stories and the big screen movies. The Salem witch trials back in 1692 and 1693 didn't help either. Oh, and don't even get her started on those silly books from England. Hecate had some choice words for those books. The goddess tilted her head, observing the younger goddess with keen eyes. True enough, however, it must be more than that if the goddess of ghosts is seeing to it personally. Wouldn't this be a job more suited for Thanatos? It feels like a small-time problem he's better off solving. The god of death was notorious when it came to dead souls trying to find a way to escape the chains of the underworld. He often had dealings with souls trying to escape the fields of punishment and the fields of asphodel, but she couldn't recall the son of Nyx dealing with a soul trying to escape from Elysium. It was unusual, Melano huffed, and couldn't help but wonder why was Hecate making this harder than needed. Normally, she wouldn't care for such things. Hecate is like a lone wolf compared to the other gods. She does what she wants in her own time. Hecate didn't show any interest in much outside of what she deemed worthy or necessary. Her friendship with her parents allowed Melano to understand what the goddess was like, and what it took to hold her attention. The mystery revolving around Naruto Uzumaki was one she wanted to solve on her own, hence the reason she had not informed her father. If she told Hecate, she feared the information would undoubtedly end up back with Hades, given Hecate's position within Hades' small but trusted inner circle. There's no need. As I said, I can handle it. It won't take long. The goddess of magic crossed her arms. Perhaps I can accompany you then, and watch you at work. Melano shook her head. Your offer is kind, but there is no need. I can't help but feel like you're trying to get rid of me, Melano. I would never. Melano feigned surprise. The task at hand is simply not one that requires the attention of two goddesses. I can be the judge of that. Frowning, Melano inwardly sighed and resorted to a tactic she hated having to use. Auntie Hecate, don't you trust me? She stuck her lip out and widened her eyes in a way that made her look like a puppy. Gods, this was embarrassing. Hecate didn't say anything straight away, but when she did, her face gained a disapproving edge. Gods, Melano, have some self-respect to lower yourself to such tactics. For shame. What? Before the goddess of ghosts could get another word out, Hecate threw up her hands. All right. If you don't want to tell me what's going on, then I'll leave it alone. You better know what you're doing though. You know how your father gets when other gods mess around in his domain. I don't need to remind you about the syrup incident back in the 1950s, do I? It took 2 weeks to clean up, and to this day Styx will take shots as Hermes when he passes by. Hades was in a mood for months, and a pain in my ass. Hecate let out an uncharacteristic huff while crossing her arms. How Persephone put up with him I'll never know. This won't be like the syrup incident. I swear, she wasn't an idiot like her Olympian uncles. Hecate gave the younger goddess one final look before disappearing in a haze of smoke, leaving Melano alone once again. Finally, Melano muttered. She thought the goddess of magic was never going to leave. Gathering her bearings, Melano took a deep breath and started along the golden brick path, a firm expression on her face, beginning the investigation on the man known as Naruto Uzumaki. At the same time as Melano making her way to Elysium, the blonde shinobi was displaying another side of him the goddesses had yet to see. Who's a cutie? Who's a cutie? Is it you? I think it is. I think it is you. Naruto babbled, making funny faces and waving his hands in the air to entertain the little girl who sat in her mother's lap. The little girl kept looking his way when he passed the table, and it didn't take long for his attention to turn her way. She was such a cute baby, blowing a raspberry at her. It didn't take long for the girl to fall into a fit of giggles, making babbling noises of her own, much to the blonde's delight and the mother's amusement. Clapping his hands in rhythm, the little girl copied his actions, her smile wide enough to show off her baby teeth. You're such a happy baby, aren't you? Yes, you are. Oh, that's such a lovely smile you have. It is, isn't it? The mother said, cradling her baby close and kissing the top of the head. She likes you. She gets fussy when she meets new people, but she seems to have taken to you immediately. You have a way with kids. It was the middle of the Friday afternoon, and he was quick to notice it was quieter than it usually was. Then again, the weather over the past couple of days had been awful, with nothing but grey clouds, rain and the odd thunderstorm hitting the residents of New York. It was strange to see such a sudden change in the weather. 1 week prior, the sun had been out, and it was warm enough that Naruto hadn't needed to wear a coat. The woman he was serving walking in 15 minutes ago, bringing along the little sweetheart in her pushchair. The pulse coming from the little girl had caught his eye the moment she came inside with her mother. It was faint given her age, but he could feel the aura coming off her. It was the first one he sensed near himself since his arrival in New York. A demigod, he thought to himself, haven't met one of them in a few decades. Walking back over to the counter, he brought over a plate with a croissant sitting in the middle. Sitting on the side was a pot of jam and a dab of butter. He meant to bring it over moments earlier, but he got distracted by his new little friend, though the mother didn't seem to mind. Crouching to his knees, he started chuckling as he gently played with the little girl's hands when she reached out for him. I don't know about that. I think it's just a sign that she's going to be a very social person when she's older. He poked his tongue out at her and laughed harder when she copied him. I bet you're going to be a cheeky one too, don't I know it? What her name, if you don't mind me asking? The young woman smiled. I don't mind, the other replied, gently bouncing the baby on one knee. This is Clarice, and I'm Aline. Aline LaRue, it's nice to meet you. He looked back at Clarice. Clarice, huh? That's a beautiful name. Both your names are French, right? Aline nodded. That's right. I named her after my grandmother, who was born in France, but moved to the United States in the 1940s after World War II ended after meeting my grandfather. You don't say. It sounds like there's a story there, the woman hummed, and gently placed Clarice back in the high chair Naruto set up for them when they first arrived. She started buttering her croissant when she continued. He was a soldier, you see, Jonathan Tracy, originally from the state of Arizona, and signed up to do his part when he was 20. He was part of the forces that dropped on the bays of Normandy, part of the second wave of troops that made their way up the beaches. He always told us it was a miracle he survived, but he'd lost some good friends that day. That day stayed with him until he passed a few years back. The blonde gained a look of sympathy. I'm sorry to hear that. He hadn't been there on the day, but he remembered seeing the aftermath of the Normandy landings. The world was a strange place, but after the Fourth Shinobi War had ended, Naruto believed he would never see war again in his lifetime. Looking back on it now, and looking at his situation, the number of wars taken place during his lifetime was countless. The unimaginable loss of innocent life from each war could populate the planet threefold. Even now, after all these years, humanity still hadn't managed to make peace with itself, and abandon the concept of war for good. Was peace achievable? Because he didn't know anymore. And they meet after the war. Aline shook her head. During the war, my grandmother was a nurse working with the French resistance. She met my grandfather after he got hit by a piece of shrapnel from a destroyed German panzer tank. It was this big and went straight through the abdomen. She held her hands out, and the space between was roughly the same length as the knife she was using. She tended to him and stayed with him until they could move him. After that, they were joined at the hip until he died. He even took her surname when they married. Naruto smiled. It sounds like a cliché movie romance in a way, And then you named your daughter after her. I did. What did your partner have to say? He asked. Oh, Aline wiped her mouth, rubbing away a piece of jam from the corner of her lip. He didn't say anything. He's not in the picture, I see. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. It is what it is. The brown-haired woman shrugged. She didn't appear overly upset that her child's father wasn't in the picture. Then again, Clarice was a happy and healthy baby if their meeting was any indication, showing that Aline was doing a good job raising her daughter. She appeared to be a well-put-together woman and was taking her role as a mum seriously. There were plenty of women who sadly didn't take that role seriously in the modern world, but it was good to see Aline was not one of them. Becoming a mum was a surprise, but since Clarice came into my life, it was like a missing piece of a puzzle I didn't know existed was completed. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do. He knew that feeling all too well. When Hinata told him she was pregnant with Boruto, he'd scarcely believed it. He was in the middle of a bowl of ramen and promptly ended up choking on his noodles. He fell into a coughing fit afterwards for 5 minutes before gaining his bearings and turned to his wife. He remembered a lot of tears from both of them, which were followed by smiles and laughter. Afterwards, he picked Hinata up and spun her around their living room, eliciting a squeak of surprise from Hinata. All their friends had been delighted for them. Choji, Ino and Kiba even started to cry, though the latter vehemently denied the accusation, telling Hayashia had been nerve-wracking. Things between them were on good ground, but the blonde remembered what Hayashi was like during their childhood, and old habits didn't disappear quickly. He needn't have been worried. The elder Hyuga embraced his daughter with tears of happiness in his eyes, before following it up by embracing Naruto. He never saw Hayashi happier than the day they told him he was going to be grandfather, a role he lived for when Boruto and Himori were born. And then the day came when Boruto was born, and he could say with his hand on his heart, he was never more nervous than that night. They were in bed when Hinata's water had broke. He nearly took the front door off when they headed for the hospital. When they arrived, he'd been in a panic, while Hinata was as cool as a cucumber. She was the one keeping him calm throughout the ordeal, which was a testament to her strength. There is no need to panic. We've spent 9 months preparing for this moment. We've got this. Her word rang through his mind. She's been right, as always, and suffice to say, Hinata kicked childbirth's ass. Even Shizune, who had been present at hundreds, if not thousands of births, complimented Hinata on how she handled it. All he could do was stand by her side, take her hand and lend his strength to his wife. Boruto's birth had taken nearly 6 hours, but the moment he arrived and Shizune placed him in Hinata's arms, it was like the world stood still. He was tiny, little tufts of blonde hair sat atop his head, showing everyone his lungs were working as they should be. They both cried, and before long, Hinata passed their son over to him. Despite practicing with a watermelon for months, Naruto still felt unready as their son sat in his arms, maneuvering his arms into the correct position. Then, as if feeling his father's insecurities, Boruto opened his tiny eyes, revealing a stunning set of blue eyes brighter than his own. At that moment, it felt like his body lifted from the earth. It could be different for other people, but for Naruto, that moment it was as if his reason for existing was to co-create this precious life sitting in his arms. Like his sole purpose in the world wasn't to be the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, nor was it to be the person who ended the 4th Shinobi War. It was to be the father of this little boy. He wondered if this was how his parents felt the moment he was born. When Himori was born, it was a similar feeling. His little girl had been the apple of his eye. And so much like his darling wife, she was always helping everyone and taking care of them. Looking at Clarice and playing with the little girl, he couldn't help but think back to all the times he played with her when she was that age. Are you okay? Blinking in surprise, he looked up at Aline. She was looking at him in concern. You're crying? I'm what? Bringing his hand up to his face, he found the woman to be correct and felt the wet patches around his eyes and his skin stretching in the corner of his eyes. I didn't even notice. When did that start to happen? He was so wrapped up in the memories of his children that he didn't notice his emotions beginning to get the better of him. Grabbing one of the unused napkins on the table, he turned away and dabbed his eyes. I'm fine, he replied. I don't know what came over me. How unprofessional of me. Aline shook her head, and her expression bore no ill will. Don't be. It's not my place to ask what caused this, but I hope you're okay. Not wanting the attention, Naruto waved it off. I'm fine. I'm not sure what that was, but I'm okay. To his relief, a table off in the corner was trying to get his attention, and provided a much-needed distraction. If you'll excuse me, he glanced down at Clarice and gave the little girl one last smile and raspberry before making his way across the room. Of course, Aline watched him go, her dark eyes following his back as he wove his way past the tables. She wouldn't pry, but she didn't believe it was nothing. Feeling Clarice beginning to fuss, she looked down and couldn't herself from smiling when she saw Clarice reaching out to him, a pouty expression on her face. Her daughter was taken with the blonde man, and in an adorable way. He was warm and gave off a kind aura that was comforting to be around. Sadly, she couldn't say the same for that idiot god who fathered her daughter. The god of war, Ares, lived up to his namesake. Damn, she had a habit for falling for the bad boys. She never intended to end up sleeping with and get knocked up by a Greek god of all people, but a couple of beers and a few shots of tequila, and boom, instant baby. The god of war didn't even bother to stick around in the morning, and only bothered to visit her after Clarice was born to inform her of his identity and the challenges Clarice would face one day. He held Clarice once, and their daughter had screamed her head off. She couldn't blame her. His aura was the opposite of the blonde barista. Thankfully, Ares didn't frequent Arizona much, and they were only in New York to visit her mum. Suffice to say, Clarice's father had yet to make an appearance if he ever did. Shaking her baby daddy out of head, Aline found herself laughing when she spied Clarice reaching for the jam. The little girl looked determined to reach the sweet condiment, though it turned to annoyance when her mother pulled it away. She looks a lot like her father when she's annoyed. Aline could only hope that was all she picked up. Underworld, the goddess of ghosts, let out a low huff as she looked out across the never-ending neighborhoods that covered Elysium. Up until this point, Melano had a plan to follow the emotional threads from Naruto Uzumaki and see where it took her. She would confront his loved ones and gather what information she could to unravel the mystery that surrounded him. However, Elysium, like its two other havens for mortal souls, was never-ending, and technically expanded forever as more and more souls filled its valleys. Now that she was within its walls, Melano could safely teleport herself across the valley and towards her goal. She couldn't do so before thanks to the enchantment placed around the valley by Hades and Hecate, which stopped anyone from teleporting in and out from Elysium as they pleased. If someone wanted to visit or leave, they had to walk through the golden gates. Even her father abided by that rule. It was purely for security purposes, but it was still a little annoying. Where to start, she said to herself, standing by the entrance and crossing her arms over her chest. Let's check the map. With Elysium as never-ending as it was, the Lord of the Underworld came up with the idea to set up a map point after entering through the gate. She remembered the conversation well, her father informing her and her mother of his decision over dinner on the veranda overlooking her mother's garden. He seemed proud of the idea but got defensive when the pair questioned him on why he was making this decision now of all times. Then she remembered the Queen of the Underworld had dragged her husband to the most godforsaken place known to both humans and gods alike, Disneyland. The idea that her father, the man that invented brooding, spent the day at the happiest place in the world was comical to imagine. Sadly, there were no pictures. Hades ensured to burn them all before returning. He wasn't going to allow any evidence of the visit becoming public knowledge. The last thing he needed was his younger brothers or the rest of Zeus's brood finding out about it. Still, Melano was aware amusement parks like Disneyland had maps detailing the entire park on every street and corner and was positive that's where her father got the idea. Also, Melano couldn't help noticing the distinct sound of the song, "It's a Small World," coming from the Fields of Punishment. She didn't envy those poor souls. Whoever created that damn song deserved 1,000 lashings courtesy of Electo and the Furies. The map was sat in the center of a courtyard as you walked through the Golden Gates, a fountain built behind it with beautiful water features shaped like animals jumping out of the water. The map was enormous, twice her size and built inside a frame of solid gold. With new souls entering Elysium daily, Elysium divided into sections. Each section resembled the very best of the living conditions from that era along with additional perks. There was ancient Greece, ancient Rome, medieval, Victorian, Renaissance, just to name a few. Biting her lip, Melano couldn't stop herself from shaking her head. None of those felt right. Her eyes initially lingered on ancient Rome and Greece, with the two being among the oldest within Elysium. In her mind, his emotional threads to the dead couldn't have gone any further than ancient Greece, since it housed the souls that first entered the underworld under her father's reign and jurisdiction. Well, that's not entirely true. Her gaze shifted from ancient Greece and slowly turned to another section on the opposite end of the map. There was one area that predated ancient Greece by a sizable amount of time. How long those souls had rested in the underworld was questionable. When Hades came to power alongside his brothers and divided up the sky, sea and underworld amongst themselves, It had taken the eldest son of Kronos decades to wade through everything that waited for him. The underworld, for lack of a better phrase, was a mess when he first arrived. Before the time of the Olympians, the Titans ruled the world. At that time, the underworld was presided over by Apatus, the fifth son of Gaia and Uranus, and the Titan of mortality, pain and violent death, and the Lord of the West. Although given the duty of watching over the underworld as a type of warden for his brother and king, Iapetus shirked his duties and looked at it as little more than a bothersome responsibility. He rarely visited the realm of the dead, and on the rare occasion he did descend to the lower world, he would lie to his brother about the state it was in. In his reports, he would tell the Titan King the underworld was doing great, and the younger brother had no reason not to trust his loyal brother. In reality, the underworld was in pieces. The souls of the dead wandered from corner to corner for eternity. Monsters did as they pleased, and the Furies each ruled a corner of the underworld with dozens of lesser creatures at their disposal. The warden had lost control, and the asylum now belonged to the inmates. Then the underworld was taken over by Hades, and the eldest son of the Titan King took one look at the lower world and decided a change was in order. He decided he needed to put his stamp on his new domain, and he did just that. He brought the Furies under his will and struck fear into the monsters that lived within the underworld. He placed Thanatos as his right hand, and with the god of death in his service, there was no one else that could refute his claim over the domain. When Elysium, the fields of punishment, and the Asphodel fields came to be, he ferried the first batch of souls to their rightful homes. Some resisted, in particular, those that belonged to the fields of punishment. However, information about the first batch of souls was the knowledge that Melano didn't have. If she had to guess, the souls belonged to the mortals that predated the Olympians, the first batch of mortals created by Gaia during the Golden Age. Hades never spoke about them, and neither did her mother. It was bizarre to think some mortals predated her father. When she asked questions about them, all he did was frown. Could they be the answer? The old souls? Ha! The voice came from over her shoulder, freezing Melano in her place. Slowly, the goddess swiveled her focus until she found herself staring into familiar green eyes. Hey, BWAH! Melano yelped, jumping back a couple of steps. Hecate, what are you doing here? The goddess of magic shrugged. A nonchalant expression was on her face, though her lips were twitching into a cheeky smile. I followed you. Oh, yeah. No shit. Why did you follow me? How did you follow me? How? Melano, I'm an old goddess, older than you, and older than your parents. I still have some tricks up my sleeves, she revealed, serving to annoy the younger immortal. Hecate had this bad habit of popping up when you least expected. Case in point, the situation Melano was now experiencing. Back to the matter. You're looking at the old souls. Why would you believe me if I said curiosity? No, I don't think I would believe you, she replied in a matter-of-fact tone. I didn't think so, she replied with a sigh. She could feel a headache coming on. You're not going to leave me alone until I tell you, are you? When the gods of magic saw something that caught her attention, she was just like every other goddess attached to their pantheon. She had to know, and she had to have it. It was universal with their family. Crossing her arms, Hecate gave Melano a look that few could go up against. Correct, so you may as well tell me why you're suddenly interested in the old souls. Souls that predate the Olympians, and are among the first group of mortals to walk this world. Souls, in which Lord Hades does not talk about with anyone. Souls that are off limits to everyone, and I do mean everyone. Hecate put plenty of emphasis on the final word for Melano to notice. Neither spoke for a good minute. But when Hecate's gaze remained stonily calm and focused, Melano couldn't do anything but relent. How could she hold such a straight face for so long? It was honestly a complete mystery to her. Fine, I'll tell you, but I'm saying it once, so you better pay close attention, and don't go and tattle on me to father. Very well. Now, please explain why you are here. Explain. She did, and she told the older immortal everything she knew, including the parts that weren't as important. Hecate didn't react with lively expressions like some gods and goddesses they knew, but one hand did come up and gently rest against her chin in an Athena-like manner. She didn't interrupt, merely listening to the information Melano had to give, only reacting with gentle head nods. After Melano finished, a twinkle in those emerald eyes of hers told Melano enough. Her curiosity was piqued, and Melano had a feeling she wouldn't be journeying through Elysium alone anymore. How interesting. I think I'll join you. And there it is, she thought. She hadn't planned to have company on this excursion of hers. However, out of all the immortals she knew, Hecate was one of the more tolerable to be around. Some like her divine uncles, namely Apollo or Ares, would make her want to rip her hair out if left alone with them. The goddesses weren't as bad, but ones like Athena, talking about mind-numbing trivia all that time, sounded like nails on a chalkboard. If it had to be anyone, she could have done far worse than the goddess of magic. I thought as much, she sighed again, sounding like a child who had their Saturday afternoon ruined. Come on, let's get going, led the way. The pair of goddesses left the map of Elysium, briefly looking at the dozens of paths that branched off to the different sections before the goddess of ghosts led them down the one that led to the Old Souls. The area was named the Old World, an apt name given the status of its residents. Melano didn't want to say it aloud, but she had no idea what was waiting for them at the other end. It was unknown to her, but she couldn't resist the temptation of her curiosity bubbling up in her stomach. All she could hope for was to get some answers before her father realized where she was and dragged her back. 2 in 1 day. Another demigod, Naruto thought, finishing up serving a customer as he turned to the entrance as the door was pushed open. Like earlier with Aline and Clarice, a woman and her daughter walked into the fox's den, though the daughter was noticeably older. If he had to guess, the girl was around 4 or 5 years of age. She had dark hair down to her chin, and a row of freckles splashed across her nose, adding an extra dose of adorable. Visibly, she didn't favor the woman much, who had long light blonde hair falling to the middle of her back and sharp features. Even their eyes, though blue, the little girl's were much darker. If he had to compare the shades, the woman's were a pale blue like the sky. The girl's though were the same shade of blue as a Chidori. Like Clarice, he could sense the aura around her. She was a demigod for sure, and the pulse coming off her was more potent. If Clarice was a splash in the pond, then this girl's was reminiscent of someone cannonballing in the swimming pool. Prepared to walk over, he stopped and stared for a second at the way the woman was moving her body. There was a stagger in her step, and every time one foot went forward, she tilted to one side. It was like watching a seesaw, and her body couldn't decide which way to go. For a brief moment, he watched her steady herself with the help of the little girl. "Welcome to the fox's den, please," he started, but halted momentarily as his nose wrinkled. The smell of alcohol clung to the woman like a second skin. It was strong, so strong that he visibly recoiled as it overloaded his sense of smell. Whether or not the woman noticed, she didn't give any indication. However, it confirmed his thoughts. She's drunk. He tried not to frown and kept a smile on his face. Looking at her face, he saw traces of mascara sloppily rubbed away, leaving dark patches on her otherwise clear skin. "Please, let me show you to a table." He ushered them to the closest table and brought out the chair for the woman to sit on. Whether the woman was aware of what was going on, he wasn't sure, but the moment she sat on the chair, she slumped forward, her face buried itself in her hands, strands of hair woven through her fingers and nails pinching against her skin. Luckily the room only had half a dozen customers, but those still here looked their way when muffled sobs broke out of the woman. Her daughter sat in the other chair and put her knees up to her chin. She just stared at her mother with those big blue eyes. The woman, for whatever the reason, was not in the right mindset. He didn't know what had caused this woman to end up this way, but maybe he could help her in some way. Pocketing his notebook and pen, he crouched down to the woman's level, gentle asking, "Ma'am, are you okay?" Whether she heard him or not, she gave no indication. Her muffled sobs only continued as he waited for an answer. "Ma'am, do you know where you are?" Again she didn't say anything. "Ma'am, my name's Naruto Uzumaki. I own the cafe you've entered, and I'm worried about your current state. Is there anyone I can call for you?" Again, there was no response but her sobs. He tried for 5 minutes, to which, half the people in the room got up and left the room. They must have found the situation too uncomfortable to bear, but he paid them no notice. Seeing he wasn't getting an answer from the parent, he tried his luck with the child. Maybe she knew what was going on. Shuffling across the table, he crouched a couple of feet away from the little girl and smiled at her to show it was okay. At first, the little girl did nothing but hide her face in her knees. She was a shy little thing, though he could see her peeking at him from the corner of her eyes. One of her hands came up and played with one of her hair clips decorating her hair. She was a little cutie. "Hi honey," he greeted, trying to use sweet words to show her he could be trusted. "My name's Naruto, and I work here." He motioned with his arms to the interior. "Do you know what's wrong with your mommy?" She didn't say anything, but he did get a little nod from her. "Can you tell me? I'd like to help." She raised her head ever so slightly. He could just about make out her mouth. Help, that's right." He edged a little closer, looking between the girl and her sobbing mother. "Did something bad happen to make her sad?" Again, the girl nodded. "Can you tell me?" As he spoke to the little girl, the remaining customers slowly filtered out of the room. Some ignored the situation in front of them, while one did show some sympathy and mouth if he needed help. He responded with a soft shake of his head, though he did mouth back a thank you for their consideration. After the last person left, he quickly got up and spun the open sign to close before returning to the little girl's side, her face scrunched up. Mommy wanted to see Daddy. Naruto didn't react, and instead softly nodded. I see, he replied. Thinking over her words, he rubbed his chin. She wanted to see Daddy, which meant she tried to see him but possibly was unable to. If that was the case, then a sticky situation was forming in front of him. If his senses about the little girl were correct, which he knew they were, then this woman had tried to visit her divine partner. Underworld, where is he taking us? Melano whispered, falling into step beside Hecate. The two goddesses walked side by side, about 2 meters behind Jiraiya as the man led them away from the hot springs. He hasn't said much since he told us who he was. What do you make of all this? Next to her, the eyes of the green goddess remained firmly on the back of their new acquaintance. She was still uneasy at how easily he took her spear from her hands. Never had a mortal or an immortal disarmed her in such quick fashion. The man was a skilled warrior, but to what degree, she was still unsure. It's hard to say, Hecate replied. One moment this man is ogling naked women through a peephole in the fence of a hot spring. The next thing we know, his whole facade of a pervert disappears, and this serious personality appears. You don't think he's a pervert, or a big one as he puts it? Oh, I think he is a pervert. However, there's more to him than that, she added, almost like it's a mask to draw someone to assess them with the hidden personality behind what you see. As Melano mentioned, the man hadn't told them much since the reveal earlier. After the reveal of being Naruto's godfather, he went a step further and added that he was also the blonde's mentor. A mentor in what? They didn't know. He stopped there and told them to follow him if they wanted answers. So they did, and they could only hope they didn't regret that decision. You know, both turned their heads and looked at Jiraiya. The white-haired spirit was looking at them from the corner of his eye, amusement clear for all to see. You two aren't being quiet. I can hear you. Melano crossed hers as they walked. Well, it wasn't like we trying to hide anything. Besides, don't you know it's rude to eavesdrop on someone's conversation? A bark of laughter escaped from the man. I would, but after years of intel gathering and listening into people's conversation, I've developed a cute hearing whether I like it or not. A snort broke from the goddess of ghosts. Are you going to tell us where we're going yet? Now, Jiraiya replied, making small gestures with his hands. Don't worry about a thing. We haven't got long to go. A couple more minutes and we'll be there. And where are we going? You haven't given us any information. The white-haired spirit simply told them to follow him if they wanted to learn about Naruto Uzumaki. Though both were cautious about where he was planning on taking them, Melano wanted answers. She was close to getting them, and if it meant following this perverted man, then so be it. Hecate, meanwhile, wasn't going to let Melano go too far over the line. What they were doing right now, making conversation with the spirits of the dead without the consent of Hades, was a big no-no. Not to mention, they were in a part of the underworld that was off limits to everyone. If Thanatos came flying overhead and spotted them, then it was game over for their little adventure. He would go to Hades, and the Lord of the Underworld would drag them back willing or unwilling. She'd seen Hades when he got angry. No thanks, she didn't want to experience his anger directed at her. Sure, Melano would get disciplined in some way. Hades would surely get creative with her punishment, and Persephone would throw her 2 drachmas into the matter. The Queen of the Underworld liked to stay involved in that way, despite being stuck on the surface. But for Hecate, she could see Hades concocting something special for her. In a sense, she was enabling Melano to go on this little quest of hers. She caught her red-handed and chose to help her rather than convince her not to go ahead with her plan. Don't worry, don't get your panties in a bunch over little details. What did you say? He spun his head around, giving them a view of his face. Jiraiya frowned with his lips pouting forward. You know, for a pair of goddesses, you're not nearly as fun as I thought you'd be. You take everything so personally. His hands came up and rested behind the back of his head. There was a jovial step to his walk, you know. This is the first time I think a goddess like yourself has ever come all this way to our little slice of paradise. At least, since we all first moved in. Man, that was a long time ago. So, you have met another god before? Melano asked. Jiraiya nodded. Oh yeah, for sure. As I said, it was a long time ago. I remember when this place used to be a big bowl of chaos. You couldn't tell which way was left or right, or up and down. You used to have to go with the flow and all that. Both immortals nodded. His words confirmed what they initially knew about the time frame of the old souls. You talk about the time the underworld was under the watch of the Titan, Iapetus, a time when the souls of the dead ran rampant over the underworld. The white-haired man shrugged. I guess. I don't know anyone by that name. Then again, that proves the guy didn't do his job of running the show. All I remembered is one day, some big guy in a helmet appeared one day and started judging us by the good and bad deeds in our lives. Many of us came here and others we never saw again. Melano nodded. It sounded like her father was much more hands-on when it came to the judging on the souls that came into his domain. These days he left it to his 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus and Aeacus. The trio had served as the judges of the dead for a long time. Though they did the job well, Melano felt the 3 took too many liberties with the power they wielded. All 3 had inflated egos. It was only natural with the given responsibilities they were possessed. Perhaps a change was in order soon. The man in the helmet was my father, Melano revealed, observing how Jiraiya's dark eyes settled on her. He's Hades, lord of the underworld, this time. Jiraiya nodded. You don't say. The name does ring a bell. Call him too curious. But he'd always wondered who the man in the helmet was. The memory was something that lingered in the back of his mind. Even after all these years, he appeared out of nowhere, forming from a shadow that would have made the Naras envious. No one had sensed him. It was like he blinked into existence. He didn't give them time to react before they were all wrapped up into the shadows. The next thing anyone knew, they were in this paradise called Elysium, and it was to be their home until the end of time. Some faces disappeared entirely. They weren't as squeaky clean as the rest of them. He wasn't sure where they went, but he had a feeling they didn't go without putting up a fight. So he runs the show down here, and you're his heir. A princess. A scowl heavily marred Melano's face. Don't call me that, Mao. Mao, so serious? The goddess growled through her teeth, while Hecate rolled her eyes and listened to the back and forth. Jiraiya sure knew how to push Melano's buttons. She pitched in her thoughts on his words. As gods or goddess, we do not have heirs the same way mortal rulers do. Though Melano is the daughter of Lord Hades, that by no means sets her up as a candidate to one day rule the underworld. As immortal beings that live forever, we could potentially rule over our domains forever. Typically, there are 2 ways for a god or goddess to give up their rule over such things, such as, for that god or goddess to willingly separate themselves from their domain, though no immortal in their right mind would ever do such a thing. Our domains help make us what we are, Hecate explained, with Melano nodding along with her words. The second is for that immortal to be removed from the picture indefinitely. Jiraiya nodded. When you say indefinitely, you mean? He ran his finger across his throat with a knowing expression on his face. Correct, boy. Oh Bokaya, I got you now. The sound of someone shouting caused the 2 goddesses to jump back in mild surprise before Hecate reformed her spear into her hands. They needn't have worried as a blur dived out of one of the trees to the left, aimed at the white-haired spirit taking the lead. They both watched as a look of annoyance washed over his face, and saw as he sidestepped out of the way, and stuck one hand out. His hand grabbed the blur, spinning his body as he caught them in his grip, and hung them upside down. Incredible reflexes, both immortals thought. It was beyond anything modern demigods, and some gods could perform. He did it effortlessly too. Nice try Gaki. But you're still too young to pull one over on me, you know, Jiraiya exclaimed, grinning down at the body caught between his fingers. Try again in a few more centuries. Maybe you'll have better luck. He started poking the smaller body with his index finger, causing them to squirm and try to sway away. Mawu, pervy sage. The body wiggled harder in the air, trying to escape though found little luck. Would you stop calling me that? Hecate and Melano snorted at the name. It was strangely appropriate for the man. As the 2 listened to the back and forth between Jiraiya and his assailant, the 2 lingered their gaze. The new spirit was a young girl, somewhere between 12 and 14. She was on the petite side with a light complexion, and dark blue hair cut into a bob. Melano found herself admiring the color. She'd never seen naturally blue hair before. At least, not on a human before. She was cute in the girl next door kind of way, with a round face and blue eyes. A striking feature both found themselves staring at was the 2 whisker marks on either side of her cheeks. Whisker marks, Melano thought. A familiar blonde barista had similar markings on his cheek if she recalled. Not to mention, the pull she was feeling for this girl in her gut was immensely strong. It was stronger than what she initially felt from Jiraiya. What are you doing here, Hema? Did your mum send you? Jiraiya asked, finally putting the girl on the floor. Despite the initial annoyance on his face, both goddesses could see the endearment in his eyes and voice. She must have been someone near and dear to him since she was trying to plant her foot in his face moments earlier. The girl patted her jumper down, before dazzling them all with a smile that struck all their hearts. "Nope, Grandma sent me. She said to tell you to move your lazy butt. Otherwise, there'll be no food left for you, and we're making Boruto's favorite. Grandma said if you're not there soon, then you're going without. You know spirits don't need food, they don't need to peep, but you still do it." She shrugged her shoulders, looking at him with absolute innocence. "Fine, fine," he replied, before pointing over to the pair of immortals watching them curiously. "Can't you see I have guests following me? That's why I'm late. Why don't you say hello?" Before Melano and Hecate could blink, the girl was in front of them. Her big blue eyes blinked up at them, filled with excitement and curiosity. "Wow, you're new." The pair looked at one another. "Hello," both said, greeting the young woman. "We haven't had anyone new in forever, like in a long time." She put her hands in the air to amplify how long. "That's typically what forever means," Hecate told her in a matter-of-fact tone. "They know. I said that already," Jiraiya replied, motioning for them to keep going and resuming the trip. "Let's keep going. I don't want Kushina and Tsunade to have my ass for being late." "But who are they? Why don't you ask them? It's polite to introduce yourself before asking for someone's name." Remember, the little girl did just that, and spun around on her heel to face them again. "Hi, I'm Himori. Who are you?" She poked her thumb into her chest. "She's very peppy and spirited," they thought before Melano went ahead and explained who they were. Suffice to say, learning she was in the presence of two goddesses was enough for her eyes to sparkle in fascination and excitement. "Wow, you're actual goddesses." "We are. And you live forever. Last we checked." "Wow, does that mean you know my dad?" "Your dad?" Hecate asked. The moment Melano heard that, her thoughts began to spin. The image of Naruto Uzumaki appeared in her mind and started comparing his face with the little girl's. There was a great deal in their features that were alike. The blue eyes, the round face, the smile, the whisker-like markings on their cheeks. It was as if someone copied his likeness on this little girl. "The one you're asking about?" Jiraiya nodded his head towards her. "Naruto's her father." Neither appeared surprised. Even Hecate, who hadn't met the blonde shinobi, had a feeling that the way it was leaning. "I thought as much. The likeness is uncanny," Melano replied. "Mum says I look a lot like my dad, but you should see Boruto," Himori added, falling into step next to Hecate and surprising the elder-looking woman. With her hands behind her back, Himori looked the picture of innocence. "Boruto, my big brother, he's 3 years older, though I'm much more mature." Himori looked proud of that statement, gaining a smug look. "Even Mum says so. Grandma says girls mature quicker than boys, even if they're younger." "I see. Are there any more kids we should be aware exist? Or does the drachma stop with you and your brother?" "Nope, just the two of us." Himori's face scrunched up in confusion. "What's a drachma?" The back and forth between Himori and the immortals continued for the duration of the journey. The pair of immortals answered what they could, though every time Melano was about to respond with a question of her own, Himori would beat her to it. If she didn't know any better, she would have said the girl had Aphrodite's divine essence running through her. However, she couldn't sense a single drop within her body and put that thought to rest. Eventually, after another 10 minutes of walking and making idle chat with their fourth companion, they found themselves at the end of the path with Jiraiya standing at an opening in the tree waiting for them. "So, are you both ready?" "Ready? For what?" "To get your answers," he revealed. "To understand who Naruto Uzumaki is and the man he is, you have to speak to the people who knew him the best, the people he affected while still alive and who made the biggest impact on him as a person. As much as I'd like to take all the credit, I'm but one factor to his makeup. To understand him, you have to speak to the people who love him the most." Both nodded and made a step forward when Jiraiya put his arm, blocking their path. "What is it?" Hecate asked, glancing at the man from the corner of her eyes. Her spear was still in her grip and toyed with it between her fingers. Deep down, a small part of her hoped he tried something. Despite being willing to aid Melano in her quest to know more about Naruto Uzumaki, the goddess of magic wanted to demonstrate his taking off her spear was a fluke. She wouldn't be caught unprepared again. "I want to make one thing clear about what you're walking into." His dark eyes hardened. Despite being a spirit, an aura of authority hummed around him, reminding them both of the elder gods. It was a way to command the attention of the people in the room. "I've let you come this far because I think you're honest in your intentions, and I like to think I'm a good read on people. Then again, I willingly admit that in the past, I've made some mistakes, and put my trust in the wrong people." The image of his former teammate flashed across his mind. "All I'm going to tell you both is this. If I detect even a hint of deceit in your words, and about your intentions, you will be sorry." The air bristled around the two immortals, and both stood straighter. The atmosphere became heavier. "Are you threatening us, spirit?" Hecate asked, wishing now more than ever to poke him full of holes with her spear. "It's not a wise course of action," Melano added, standing shoulder to shoulder with the elder immortal. The whites of their eyes began to glow, and shine with brilliant gold. One would have thought two goddesses like themselves standing side by side and facing down a single soul would have forced the individual to shudder in terror and regret speaking. Instead, the white-haired man backed up his claim by crossing his arms and staring them down, refusing to budge or show the change in the atmosphere bothered him. Himori merely smiled off to the side, and patiently waited for them to finish with her hands clasped behind her back. "Maybe not, but my words still stand," Jiraiya added. He showed no sign of letting the leak of power coming from the pair bother him. It looked like it barely tickled him, allowing for cooler heads to prevail, and seeing their show of strength wasn't having the desired effect, Melano was the first to lose her glow, followed soon after by Hecate. The power leaking out from them was only a small portion of their divine essence, but neither could afford to release anything higher. Otherwise, they run the risk of being noticed by Hades and Thanatos. "We stand by what I told you earlier. We're here to learn and nothing more. Afterwards, we'll leave you all peace." A hum emanated from Jiraiya's throat, glancing at the two immortals for a moment. "Just so you know, if you did try something," he pointed his thumb at the opening, "the people on the other side will make you regret it. We might not have our chakra in death, but that doesn't make us useless with that." Jiraiya spun around, walked through the entrance, and made a motion for everyone to follow him. Himori skipped along in front of them, and after a moment of letting his words sink in, Melano and Hecate followed suit. Just who in the world was waiting for them on the other side, and what was chakra? Stepping through the clearing, Melano found herself stopping after only a couple of steps through the opening in the trees. The area they were in was idyllic, and how mortals must imagine paradise. A small lake sat to the left of them, with a bank of white sand settled between the water and the grass. On the sand, she spied a group of people with their backs to them, situated around a barbecue and a set picnic blankets. What made her stop, however, was the man waiting for the halfway between them and the group. If she didn't already know Naruto Uzumaki was alive, she would claim that he stood in front of them. The same blue eyes, and the shock of golden sun-kissed hair. He looked no older than his mid-20s. When the man began walking closer, Melano started to see the slight differences between them. The man's hair was longer, with bangs framing his face, and his face was more angular. He lacked the whisker-like markings on his cheeks too, and held an aura of confidence around him. Looking at him with a hard gaze, she could tell he was the kind of man who would catch the attention of the goddess of wisdom. His eyes held an intelligence in them that would catch her attention with a glance. "Jiraiya-sensei, it's about time you arrived," they heard the man reply, stopping a few feet from Jiraiya and smiling at the older man. "And you brought guests?" His gaze swept over them, and to their surprise, gave a small bow. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Minato, Grandpa." Look! Himori skipped over to the man, and the pair watched as Minato put his arm around the girl and placed a delicate kiss on the top of her head. The act made the girl beam with delight. "These are my two new friends, Melano and Hecate. They're goddesses, and they know Dad. This is Naruto's father." Melano realized in her head and shared a look with Hecate. The goddess of magic realized it too. He must have died young if he looks the same age as his son. Minato blinked in surprise. His mouth was trying to form words, but nothing was coming out. He turned to look at Jiraiya, who remained silent, though nodded his head to confirm her words. Audibly gulping, he asked, "You know my son?" A hopeful look was in his eyes. "We do. They came hoping to learn more about the blonde Gaki," Jiraiya mentioned as he set off towards the group resting on the sand. The group were all looking their way, likely wondering who their guests were. "I saw no harm." Instantly, Melano and Hecate found themselves ushered forward, with Minato gently guiding Melano forward and Jiraiya walking behind her at a leisurely pace. Hecate was being pulled forward by Himori, the little girl with one of her hands on the goddess's wrist. Though surprised at how overly friendly the young girl was, she didn't fight it and make a scene. The girl appeared curious about her. She wasn't used to children acting in such a way around her. Most tended to keep their distance thanks to the mysterious aura she outputted. "Kushina, come here for a moment," Minato called out, a sense of urgency in his voice. "You too, Mama." "Baruto," Himori shouted, giggling all the while. Shrugging, Jiraiya added his voice, "Haim, you might as well too." Reacting to the voice, Melano watched as the four figures, now realizing they were the bodies of 3 women and a teenage boy, all got up and met them halfway. The first person Melano paid attention to was the teenage boy. It wasn't hard to determine who he was, given he shared the same blonde hair and blue eyes as his father and grandfather. The main difference was the scar that ran down his right eye, giving him the kind of appeal that would draw the likes of Aphrodite out from her temple. He was handsome too, not that it looks was doing anything for her, it was just something she noticed. He stood taller than the three women. From the women, the first she focused on was the woman in the middle. It was hard to look away. Her hair was the most beautiful shade of red Melano had ever seen and reached to her shins. It was perfectly straight, with it flowing from side to side like a velvety curtain. It was hard not to reach out and run her hand through to see if it was as silky as she imagined. Her eyes were the color violet, and she stood the shortest of the three women. Looking at her features, Melano could see distinct similarities between this woman and Naruto. The shape of her face, the shape of her eyes, her smile. She could only be one person. The second woman also had a feature that caught her attention, though it wasn't her hair. Whoa, look at the size of those. Admittedly, the first thing she noticed was the woman's chest. To say she was busty was an understatement. Her grandmother, Lady Demeter, was known throughout Olympus to be the bustiest of her fellow goddesses, something she enjoyed lording over them whenever she had too much of Dionysus's wine. This woman was comparable, if not a little bigger. If she was still alive, she had no doubt one of the gods would have tried to woo her. Along with her notable bust, her blonde hair fell into pigtails down to the middle of her back. Her eyes were also hazel. She was beautiful. Who am I kidding? All I can look at are those giant melons. Ending with the third woman, she too was beautiful and exotic looking. One look at the woman's indigo hair cut into a bob was enough for Melano to know who she was. Like Naruto, many of her features passed down to Himori. Her skin was a tone lighter than the other two women, but stood the tallest out of the three. She dressed conservative, but it did little to hide the curves sitting beneath the fabric. What was it with the women of the Golden Age? Why were they all stunning? Something in the water. Aphrodite wasn't born from the sea until centuries later, so there were no daughters of Aphrodite running around yet. Let me introduce you to four of the most important people in the Gaki's life, Jiraiya told her, and pointed at each one as they neared the group. The kid is Boruto, his son. Though you probably already figured that out, Melano nodded. The blonde woman is Tsunade, the fifth Hokage and my old teammate. You could say she was a motherly figure in his life, trying to keep him on the straight and narrow when his knucklehead ways got him into trouble. The redhead is Kushina, his mum, and Minato's wife. She runs a tight ship in their marriage, if you know what I mean. He followed up his statement with a whip noise. In front of them, Minato turned and frowned at his sensei, earning a shrug from the older man. Finally, the lovely lady with indigo hair is Hinata, his wife and the love of his life. Though she figured that out already, Melano was grateful for the confirmations. Who's this? Tsunade asked, the first to reach them with a raised eyebrow. She looked the two goddesses up and down, her guard up around the pair of strangers. I've never seen either of them from around here, and we know everyone. Who are you, girly? Melano and Hecate opened their mouths to speak, though Jiraiya beat them to it. Now Haim, is that any way to speak to a pair of goddesses? Jiraiya asked. Instantly, both eyebrows rose from the statement. Goddesses? Seriously, Jiraiya? How much sake have you been drinking? It's true, I swear, it's true. Grandma Tsunade, they're goddesses, Himori added, letting go of Hecate and moving next to Tsunade, looking up at her with those big blue eyes. Pervy sage wouldn't lie about something like that. I think you give him too much credit, Tsunade mumbled, though patted the little girl on the head. Jiraiya slumped, his arms hanging in the air. So mean, Haim, for good reason. You perv. Okay, this is taking longer than I imagined, Melano thought, and decided to intervene before an argument broke out. The blonde woman, Tsunade, looked ready to knock Jiraiya in the air if the twitch of her right fist was any indication. He tells the truth. My name is Melano, goddess of ghosts and the daughter of Hades, ruler of the underworld. That piece of information was enough to catch their attention. I'm here to learn about Naruto Uzumaki. Instantly, their backs all straightened and stared at the goddesses with something akin to wonder and shock. You know my dad? Boruto whispered, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of denial and hope. I wouldn't say I know him, but I've met him, she revealed, their focus on her unwavering. He's a peculiar man. Since he appeared, the gods of my family have been drawn to him like a flame attracts a moth. Your souls that predate my family, the Olympians. We are a family of gods that rule over much of the world in secret, doing so for over 5,000 years. Naruto Uzumaki, for reasons I failed to understand at first, had connections and ties to you all, which should be impossible. Now though, That question is answered given I have learned your relations with him. However, her frown deepened. A new question has appeared. If Naruto Uzumaki was alive in your time, a time we refer to as the Golden Age, then how is he still alive all these millennia later? As she spoke, everyone, Jiraiya, Himori and Minato included, looked as if a fist hit them in the gut. Minato turned around and put his hands over his head, now letting everyone see his troubled expression. His wife moved over to his side, a dazed expression on her face, mumbling something to herself and shaking her head. Minato, I know, Kushina, I know, why isn't he here with us? The question broke through as a sob escaped the red-haired woman, prompting her blonde husband to put an arm around her shoulders and bring her in close. 5,000 years, Jiraiya muttered to himself, shaking his head and looking at the ground. Has it been that long? Boruto added, his hands in his pockets and swallowed a thick gulp. Time works a little different in here compared to the rest of the world, Hecate revealed, watching Himori move to stand beside her mother. After a while, time becomes distorted. Is he okay? A muffled voice asked. The voice came from Hinata, the pale-eyed woman who had her mouth covered by her hands. Her knees looked ready to give out. Slowly, she was walking until she stopped a foot away from the goddess of ghosts. Is he okay? For the most part, she revealed, revealing what she sensed from Naruto concerning his emotional ties to them. He misses you all. He misses you all a great deal. A sob broke from Hinata. We miss him. I miss him. Do you have any answers to my question? How after all this time, he's still alive? She was hoping for some kind of answer that would fill in the blank pieces in her mind. If anyone knew, it must be the family. To her disbelief, it was Boruto who answered her. And it wasn't the answer she hoped to get. We were hoping you might know that answer. Bisu, we don't know either. After the eventful day at the Fox's Den and finding himself forced to close early for the day, the blonde shinobi found himself entertaining his two guests at his home. Despite living in New York for nearly 6 months, this was the first time he had guests. Fortunately, he didn't need to worry about impressing either of them with the inside of his home. Any renovations he was making to the townhouse ended over a fortnight ago, leaving him pleased with the work he and his clones put in. One guest was still unconscious in one of the guest rooms. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, with a pack of aspirin ready and waiting for the oncoming headache the blonde woman was going to experience. He didn't envy her. Then again, she only had herself to blame. His other guest, though, he was entertaining in his kitchen, awaiting the dinner he promised her when transporting them from the den. Her dark blue eyes radiated excitement and licked her lips as the smell wafted around her nose. It was adorable. A glass that was half full of juice sat to one side with a tiny splash next to Costa. A stack of papers with colored pens and pencils sat neatly in the corner. Order up. 1 cheeseburger with no pickles and a side of curly fries for the little lady, Naruto called out, striding across his kitchen with the plate resting on his fingertips. Yay! The little girl cheered, eyes lighting up when the plate sat in front of her. Bringing Talia and her mum to his home was not something he planned when the older woman fell into unconsciousness. His first train of thought had been to call the emergency services and have someone come and pick them up. In all likelihood, ending up drunk with your kid in tow would not go down well with the authorities. If the local child services got involved, they would inevitably conduct some form of investigation on the pair. They would want to know if today's actions on the mother's behalf for getting drunk in the middle of the day was a regular occurrence, or a one-off. Either way, he'd been a second away from walking to his phone when he noticed, eyes watching them from across the road, hidden behind the trash cans and dumpsters. Someone like Talia, who gave off an aura that attracted the worst kind of creatures in her general direction, was like honey to a hungry bear. To him, monsters left him well enough alone, no matter which corner of the world. Let's just say monsters, no matter the pantheon, chose to keep their distance from the shinobi. It wasn't in their best interest unless they wanted a one-way ticket to hell. Monsters, no matter what form they took a keen interest in demigods. It was like they were the special of the day on a menu for an exclusive diner that catered only to monsters. A rare treat that they couldn't ignore, no matter how hard they tried. Little Talia, with the aura she didn't know she possessed, was like a magnet for those monsters. If it wasn't for his presence near the little girl, then he imagined those monsters would have tried to swarm the house if the opportunity appeared. He wasn't about to let that happen. So, before leaving the Fox's Den with Talia clinging to his side, and her mother sleeping on his back in the form of a piggyback, he sent another clone to take care of the creature before it gathered its courage. When the memories of his clone returned to him, all he found was his clone landing on the shoulders of a wide-shouldered one-eyed man. He didn't give the creature a chance to react before twisting his body around and snapping the creature's neck with an audible crunching noise. The last thing he saw was the monster bursting into a cloud of gold dust before the clone dispelled himself. Taking a seat next to her at the little table tucked away in the kitchen, he watched with an amused smile as she tore away at the burger. He tried not to laugh, but the little girl had ketchup all over her mouth. She was about to wipe her mouth with her sleeve before he stopped her. Grabbing a napkin laid out on the table, he gently wiped her face. "We don't want ketchup and grease all over you nice clothes, do we?" He couldn't stop the smile on his face. "It doesn't matter. It's only clothes," the girl whined, causing him to chuckle. The way she wriggled around and pouted when he cleared her face reminded him of the times he did something similar for Naruto. Himori was a little angel when it came to keeping herself clean. Naruto, on the other hand, was the polar opposite. If he saw a puddle in the street, his little boy had to jump in it, while Himori would walk around it. Judging by Talia's pouty face, she was in the same vein as his son. Then again, he was the same way at that age too. "I know, but I'm sure your mum spent a lot of money on them. We don't want to ruin them, do we?" The pout continued, and his smile widened when she let out a low huff. She was so cheeky. Before long, she was devouring the curly fries at an astonishing rate, reminding him of a particular customer who shoveled cake into her mouth like it was her last meal. Years ago, away from Olympus, Hestia could finally hear herself think as she kept her eyes on the dark path ahead of her. Selene's light illuminated her way as she trekked through the undergrowth. The first decade had come and gone since the Olympians had begun their rule over the known world, and as expected, her youngest brother and king of the gods had something big planned for Olympus. All the gods that aligned with Olympus gathered together in the throne room and listened as Zeus decreed a week-long celebration to commemorate their victory over the Titans. The announcement made her roll her eyes good-naturedly, but seeing her siblings excited at the prospect of a week of fun was enough for her to support the decision. It was just a very Zeus decision. The king of the gods loved a good party, though what he loved more was the beautiful nymphs who vied for his attention in their short-length chitons and fluttering eyes. She was sure that was why Zeus threw as many parties and celebrations as he did. He had a weakness when it came to pretty girls, and his wandering eyes and hands were going to get him in trouble one day. She could only hope he and Metis one day tied the knot. She felt Zeus was the kind of man who needed a strong woman to anchor him down and keep him from getting away with everything. Metis was strong-willed and smart, the perfect choice for someone like her youngest brother. Though she wasn't a goddess who frequented many parties and kept to herself most days, the anniversary provided her with the chance to see all her brothers and sisters. Since coming into their domains, Zeus, Poseidon and Hades were rarely in the same room as each other. Hades, since taking over the underworld, rarely came above ground. Her brother didn't talk much about the work he was doing beneath the earth on the few meetings they shared over the decade. All she got was the snippets from her mother. According to her, the underworld had been a mess when Hades took over, and Hades was doing everything he could to overhaul it and bring the creatures that dwelled there to heal. For Poseidon and Zeus, taking control over the sky and the sea was simpler. With Poseidon, reign over the sea was smoothly passed over to Poseidon by their uncle, the eldest of the Titans, Oceanus. The Titan of the sea was the only son of Uranus and Gaia that refused to aid Kronos in his war against the younger immortals and remained a neutral party. The elder Titan left for deeper sanctuaries within the ocean along with Tethys and many of their children. Since then, Poseidon had built his palace to rival Olympus, to which he dubbed Atlantis. Though she visited only one, Atlantis was a sight to behold. Zeus, on the other hand, had assumed the role of god of the sky in no time, due to the sky having no one to rule over it since the slaying of Uranus. The sky had remained untouched, with only Helios and Selene to safeguard it until someone assumed power over it. It fitted Zeus to a T and went pleasantly with his dominion over lightning. She feared the kind of fun Zeus could get up there. 2 days into the celebration on Olympus, Hestia decided she needed some much-needed peace. She tried to escape to her temple to get a few hours to herself, but she was rudely interrupted by Demeter and Selene. The Moon Titan and the goddess of the harvest wasted little time in looping their arms through hers and dragging her back to the throne room. Everyone cheered when Hestia got pulled back, making her huff in annoyance at her rotten luck. After much due diligence on her part, she was finally able to slip away unseen and unnoticed when everyone was distracted by the scene of Hera trying to poke Helios full of holes with her spear. The Sun Titan continuously tried and failed to woo the young goddess. The only thing he was successful in was pushing Hera's buttons and causing her infamous temper to spike. For once, she would have to thank the Sun Titan for his efforts, despite him being none the wiser. With Olympus out of her line of sight, she took to the earth and walked with no clear path on her mind. The world was vast, and she had yet to see the wonders that Mother Earth provided them in plenty. After the great shift from Gaia at the end of the Titanomachy, much of the known world had changed. A new world was ready to be explored, with mountains unclimbed and forests untouched. She remembered watching as the world Earth began to change, and she couldn't deny a small part of her was excited at the new prospects she could examine. One day, perhaps she could say with certainty that the goddess of the hearth had walked the earth corner to corner. When would that be? She didn't know. She only had an eternity to find out. She hummed to herself as she walked. Away from Olympus, she trailed the edge of the yet-to-be-named middle continent that rested on Gaia's surface. The world had become so different. It was odd to think it was the same one her father once ruled. What's that? There was a soft glow coming from in front of her, 100 meters away by a cliff face. She was familiar with the type of glow cast. Spying shades of orange and yellow, it was clear someone had a fire going. Who could it be, she wondered. She didn't sense the divine aura from her kin. Deciding to investigate, Hestia walked towards the faint glow with trepidation. Though there was no divine aura, that didn't mean she didn't need to have her guard up. There was an abundance of creatures that inhabited the world. Lacking a divine aura didn't squander their potential for being lethal and dangerous. Although she wasn't a fighter like her brothers and sisters, it didn't mean she was defenseless. As the goddess of the hearth, she possessed divine authority over the fire in a way her siblings could only hope to have. It was comparable to Zeus with lightning, or Poseidon with water. Though her two younger brothers possessed a great deal more in terms of power, her advantage was her advanced control in comparison. In a short moment, she was near her target. She stood silent in the brush of some trees, keeping out of sight as a figure sat beside a campfire. The person sat on a log, with his body leaning forward with hands clasped together. His back was facing her, though she could see blonde hair covering his head. It was rather long, with bangs framing his face on both sides and reaching past his chin. He dressed in tattered clothes covered in rips and tears. She frowned. It didn't look like any kind of chitin she'd seen before. She hid behind a tree. She'd never seen this person before. Is he a human? That should be impossible. Humanity, or at least, the first generation of humanity was no more. The golden generation, as some referred to them, perished in the great shift near the end of the war. When the single landmass that made up the world began to shift and change, the gods and titans watched as the world was forced to change. The other pantheons throughout the world, like the Norse and the Egyptians, could do nothing but watch. Despite the history that came with each pantheon, Gaia was the first. No matter how hard each pantheon tried to dismiss it, Gaia spared no one. Her creations were taken out of the world by the very person that breathed life into them centuries ago. Why it happened, no one knew. Gaia had been in a constant state of slumber for centuries, ever since the Titans were given the reins over the kingdom. Her consciousness periodically acted, despite remaining asleep, such as when she shielded Zeus from the Titans and allowed him to grow and attain his strength. The changing of the continent had been without warning, and no one could do anything but get out the way. When Gaia chose to alter the world, she did so. The choice belonged to no one but the Earth Mother. To see a survivor after all this time was a surprise. "I know you're there." She almost jumped when she heard the voice. It was low and soft, but she heard it as clear as day. The figure was a he, and he hadn't turned around. His back was still facing her. "I won't hurt you. I just don't like people spying on me," he said again, unclasping his hands and making a motion to the other side of the fire. Another log sat against the earth. "If you'd come any later, that log would be getting used as firewood. Unless you prefer to sit on the ground." She didn't move at first. Hesitation lingered on her face, though she did peek out from behind the tree, letting the glow of the fire wash over her face. Extending her hand, the man finally moved when a stream of fire shot through the air and curled into Hestia's palm. It moved and danced between her fingers like water, moving around rocks in a river. She didn't want to come across as hostile since the man next to the fire hadn't done anything to warrant it, but she needed him to know that despite her appearance, she wasn't defenseless. She may have been a pacifist by nature, but that by no means meant she was incapable of protecting herself. Numerous members of the Titan forces could attest to that. "You have fine control over the flames," he replied, with Hestia's getting a good look at the man's blue eyes. "I won't harm you." "I have no reason to do so." She detected no hint of deception in his words. Walking out from the woods, she walked across the campsite, her brown eyes keeping watching on him. She felt his gaze on her as she sat on the log, brushing down the fabric across her knees. She saw no weapons visible on his person. "Who are you?" He looked back at the fire, and Hestia could see the reflective glow in his eyes. No one special, he admitted. Just a man who's grown tired with the world. His eyes were sad and tired. He looked like he hadn't got a wink of sleep in days or weeks. You're from the golden generation, aren't you? She asked. She tried not to react when he nodded his head. He didn't appear bothered by her statement. I am. Very astute of you. How are you still alive? We couldn't sense any living member of the golden generation after the continent broke apart. We assumed you all perished. They searched for as long as they could for any survivors, before returning to close off the war. No. Only I remain, he stated, before adding, we. You mean your divine brethren again? She didn't show her surprise. Yes. You know us, I do, he admitted. At least, I've heard of you. The Olympians, the one that fought and defeated the Titans. Hearing the question in his words, Hestia nodded. I'm glad your family won. I think most in the world are glad we won. The Titans were responsible for a lot of the world's problems, with my father spearheading them. With them gone, I can only hope my siblings and I can bring about a change for the better. She heard him hum, watched him nod his head before looking her way again. This time she got a good look at his face. He was still a man in his youth in appearance, with the strangest markings on his cheeks. They reminded her of the whiskers from her mother's pair of lions. His hair even resembled a mane-like one too. She remembered observing members of the golden generation in the early days of her release from her father's stomach. She'd been so curious to discover more about the world they lived that she spent weeks just watching and learning. The mortals in the world were bizarre and wore clothing vastly different from their own. He didn't seem dangerous. Admittedly, looks could be deceiving. Looking at Hera and Demeter, one would not think the two were warriors until you saw Demeter wield a sword and Hera a spear. Many of their foes made the mistake of looking down on them and paid the price. Well, I wish you luck. Hopefully, you'll do better than your predecessors. I hope that too. She could only hope Zeus didn't fall the same as Kronos did. Their father didn't raise the bar to a high standard. So what brings one such as yourself out to the middle of nowhere? Taking some time to myself. I love my siblings, but they can be a bit much sometimes. Zeus and Poseidon, in particular, could be very loud and boisterous. Hades could be very glum, and it tended to be infectious. Hera had a temper, and Demeter was very clingy. Each one had their personality quirk. I enjoy the quieter moments. An understanding look appeared on his face. Well, don't let me keep you. Thank you for stopping to talk with me, even if it was brief. Have a good night, he replied, turning away from Hestia and returning his gaze to the fire. It didn't sound dismissive to Hestia. It was more like he wanted to be left alone, despite Hestia getting the sense he wanted the opposite. There's no rush. Her words made him look back again. I only just got here, and I wouldn't mind the company. A lone eyebrow rose. I thought you wanted to be alone. I wanted to get away from my family for one night, which I've done. Plus, you look like you could use the company. His expression didn't change from her words. You don't know me, I don't, though we could change that, she said back. I'm Hestia. Since you know my name, perhaps I could learn yours. He looked at her for a few moments, as if having a silent debate in his mind. Naruto. My name's Naruto. A pleased look wove onto her face. It's nice to meet you, Naruto. For the first time since she sat down, the edges of his lips edged up. You too, Hestia. Present, standing in the doorway to the guest room Talia was sleeping in, Naruto watched as his old friend took a spot on the bed next to the sleeping girl, smoothing down her dress as she sat down. Dressed in casual mortal wear, the goddess of the hearth gently reached over and swept her fingers through Talia's dark locks. The girl didn't stir. Instead, the warmth coming from Hestia's palm seemed to comfort the little girl, with the goddess watching as she snuggled herself into a tight ball with the covers wrapping around her like a cocoon. A gentle hum came from her throat, and her lips curved into a smile. Talia was a cute one. Being a former member of the major 12 Olympians, the eldest daughter of the Titan King had more time than her siblings to watch over the children spawned from her immortal family. Due to her lighter schedule compared to Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, her younger brothers often sought her out and called favors on her to keep an eye on the children with Erythra running in their veins. Thalia's existence hadn't been a surprise to Hestia. She loved Zeus, but he was too easily led astray from his marriage with Hera. His wandering eyes and hands hadn't settled with growing age. Despite being married to one of the most beautiful goddesses in existence, one woman never seemed to be enough for Zeus. The same could be said for her other brothers, though not to the same extreme. Poseidon was much like his younger brother, though he could be picky and didn't try to pick up the first pretty woman that came his way. For Hades, it was companionship to fill the void until Persephone rejoined him in the underworld. A low laugh escaped her lips, gaining Naruto's attention. What is it? Hestia shook her head. making the dark curls of her hair bounce in the air. It's nothing. I've just never seen one of my brother's children have freckles before really. None of the other few hundred kids had freckles. I think it's more like 1,000 when it comes to Zeus, she chirped back, a finger delicately tracing over Thalia's face, but no, none of them had a splash of freckles across their nose and cheeks before. She has his traditional features, like his blue eyes and dark hair. I can feel the ozone coming off like a vibration in the air. She'll be a strong one if she makes it to adulthood. If. It was a very big if. There was no guarantee any demigod could make it out of their teens, or even their preteen life. As the blonde already knew, monsters were attracted to demigods like a moth to a flame. The moment a demigod with a strong enough aura, or the scent entered their senses, they took after them. It was like blood in the water sending a shark into a frenzy. In the last couple of centuries, I've been keeping an eye on my brother's children from time to time, she told him, though it always possible a few slipped through the cracks. Even I have a hard time keeping track of my brother's infidelities, I remember you saying, he replied, watching with a small smile as Hestia interacted with Talia. Technically, Hestia was Thalia's aunt and wasn't surprised to find out she had been keeping an eye on her when she could spare it. You keep an eye on Talia often, from time to time. For the most part, little Talia has been happy enough, though the mother troubled me from the onset. She turned her head, if Talia is here, and Beryl is not, that she chose to walk away from her child. She has, he confirmed, and saw the disappointment and sadness lace through Hestia's features. Your brother sure knows how to pick them. Beryl showed no remorse or love for her daughter. All she cared about what the fame and riches robbed from her by Thalia's existence. He shook his head in disappointment. I haven't met such a selfish person like that in some time, sadly. Beryl Grace is not the first mortal parent to abandon their demigod child, nor will she be the last. The gods in my family, as well as the goddesses, don't have the best track record when it comes to the mortals they bring to their beds. She returned her gaze to Talia. She looked so innocent and uncaring of the future that now sat in front of her. All Hestia could do was hope Morpheus was giving the girl pleasant dreams. She is a cute one. A low laugh came from Naruto. She is cheeky as well. Sounds like you got to know her today, he shrugged. Someone had to keep an eye on her today. A monster was following them, but I got rid of it before bringing them here. Didn't think I needed any more complications today. Tucking a strand of Thalia's dark hair away from her face and behind her ear, Hestia quietly stood up from the bed. She made sure the girl was well covered by the sheets. Before moving away, let's leave her to sleep. I bet today has been a long one for the poor dear. Both Naruto and Hestia left the room, with Naruto silently pulling the door until a 3-inch gap remained. Together, the pair returned downstairs, with Naruto leading Hestia into the living room. The goddess took the spot on the armchair next to the couch and placed a cushion behind her back. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in her old friend's new home. Despite its size, Naruto had done well at making his home feel welcoming. In particular, Hestia eyed up the fireplace that sat in the center of the wall. The perks of having a friend whose domain was the home. She may have given him a few tips in the past on how to make one's home feel like an extension of themselves. For Naruto home, it was a place that made you feel safe. It perfectly summed the blonde up. Would you like the usual, he asked, standing in the doorway and watching Hestia scanning over the room. Yes, please. And why don't we make use of the fireplace as well? Coming right up. Sitting in peace for 10 minutes, while Naruto whipped something up for them, Hestia took the chance to move herself to the floor in front of the fireplace. Conjuring a blanket, Hestia tucked her legs to the side while her poker appeared in her hand. Gently, she stoked the flames. It wasn't long before Naruto rejoined her, carrying a small tray in his hands. You've made yourself at home, he commented, lowering himself down until he was sitting on his backside with his legs tucked against him. He picked up a teacup and saucer and guided it over to Hestia, who happily took it from him. Your usual. 1 apple and elderberry tea with a tiny splash of honey, thank you. Bringing the drink up to her mouth, Hestia sighed in delight at the fruit punch that hit her sense of taste. Delicious. I see your tea-making skills are still up to par. Well, when you live in Japan for as long as I did, making tea becomes a required skill. People think Brits drinks a lot of tea. They've never been to Japan and visited a tea ceremony. He spent a long time in the East, in particular, Japan. Japanese culture was the one that resembled his old home the most, and being around their towns and cities in the early days helped him to feel like he gained it back in a small way. Plus, Hinata would never forgive me if I forgot all her lessons in tea making. The s'mores, a snort broke from Naruto, before lifting the plate of s'mores from the tray and handing them over to Hestia. They weren't anything fancy, but they would do. All you needed was graham crackers, marshmallows and some chocolate, and in return, you'd have a very pleased hearth goddess. Watching her conjure a small poker like the one she created earlier, she stuck 2 s'mores on the end of each and handed one over to the blonde. "You have a lovely home," Hestia told him, as the pair held their sweet treats over the flames. "I'm sorry I haven't come to visit you sooner. I was planning to visit during the first months, but things at home got in the way." "That's okay. I had a feeling you'd come calling at some point, so I kept an eye out for you most days." He let out a low chuckle. "I had a feeling that members of your family would visit the den at some point since I'm in New York, but I didn't think some of them would become some of my best customers." Smiling, Hestia replied, "I hear Artemis and Athena have both become regulars, and visit you nearly every week." "Oh yeah. Athena is easy to cater to. Artemis," though he muttered, before letting out another low chuckle, "that stomach of her doesn't seem to have a bottom. She's like me when it comes to ramen, and I know how challenging I could be with my appetite. They always rave about you." It was surprising to hear my 2 nieces complimenting a mortal man of all things. "Athena is one thing, but Artemis is another." Her mouth formed into a smirk. "I hear you've gained Aphrodite's attention as well." A groan escaped from his lips. "Don't start with that. That woman," he muttered, his head drooping. "I've been alive a long time, Hestia, and I've never met someone who's so blatant about those kinds of desires. She might as well just hold up a sign that says, 'Hey, come over here and do me.'" A finger flicked his ear, causing him to wince. "Don't be so crass." The goddess had never been one for rude language. The blonde blew a raspberry Hestia's way. "I don't hear you disagreeing. Aphrodite has always been a bit of a character, even by Olympian standards. That doesn't make her any less a friend and a member of my family." "I still don't hear you saying otherwise," Hestia huffed, and rotated her s'more over the fire. "She can be a handful, and that's all I'm saying." "A handful? Yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it." He brought up his drink, taking a good long swig of the hot substance before following up with, "Then there's that nephew of yours, and the little show he was putting on in my restrooms." He heard a sigh from the goddess. "Let me guess. Apollo? That boy is as bad as his father. Worse at times. He's Zeus's son all right." "Never any doubt about that," Hestia commented. She heard about Apollo's little incident from the Olympian gossip grapevine. Nymphs could be the worst gossips, and when the goddess of love was involved, then nothing stayed a secret for long. No matter where in the world an embarrassing event took place, it always ended up coming back to Olympus. Hephaestus had even made a side hobby with Olympus TV. His cameras were everywhere, ready and waiting. Naruto hummed in amusement. "I wonder when he'll be popping in for a visit." "Oh, I don't think you'll see him anytime soon," she admitted, her eyes flickering between brown eyes and flames. "Hephaestus prefers to keep to himself. He's never been a sociable person the same way his brothers are. I think that's why most of the goddesses in my family prefer to be around him than the likes of Apollo or Ares." "Everyone except Aphrodite," Naruto commented. "Everyone except Aphrodite," Hestia confirmed, before giving him a funny look. "Strange, how we looped back around to her." "Hey, you brought her up." Naruto held up his hands, before letting out a low chuckle. It wasn't long before Hestia was chuckling along with him. "It's good to see you again, Hestia." "It's good to see you too, my old friend," she replied, looking at Naruto fondly. Their friendship spanned millennia. It could have been the longest-lasting friendship in history for all they knew. For Hestia, Naruto provided her with a reprieve from the family she cherished so much. When she needed time away, she visited him in whatever land he chose to make his temporary home. She would stay for a few weeks, sometimes even months, catching up and going off on little adventures of their own. As she quickly came to realize, Naruto had this uncanny ability to draw the most peculiar people towards him, akin to a magnet. Oh, the people they met, and the things they saw would make her siblings green with envy. He was an escape, and one of the few from outside of her family that she cherished dearly. For Naruto, it was the friend he needed during the most agonizing time in his life. Without Hestia by his side, he wouldn't have been able to escape the hole of loneliness and despair he found himself trapped within. "You've found yourself in quite the predicament." "I'd say I'm surprised, but we both know I'd be lying." "Yeah, it's been a crazy day," Naruto confirmed, taking his s'more out of the fire and gently blowing on it. "I didn't think when I woke up this morning I'd be housing an abandoned demigod." Said demigod also happens to be your niece and your brother's daughter. A serious look crossed Naruto's face. "Tell it to me straight, Hestia. What options does Talia have?" Hestia mimicked his actions with her own s'more, gently cooling it down with her breath. At this moment in time, she started, taking a small bite from her s'more and licking the corners of her lips. "She has 3 options that I can see. 3. Alright, then let's hear them. The first option is the least likely to work, so let's get it out of the way. The first choice is to take Talia back to her mother in California. She watched as Naruto's face morphed into a grimace. I can see you don't favor that idea, not in the slightest. If Talia gets sent back to Beryl, it will only spur her to do it again. Next time, she could get left with someone who wants to harm Talia, rather than help her. It was luck Beryl and Talia stumbled into the fox's den. Any other establishment would have called Child Protective Services, and Talia would have found herself in the foster system where anyone could get to her. She'd be a target for monsters in human, and human. I think we'll pass on option 1, agreed. Option 2, well, it's more favorable, though it still has concerns. I contact Chiron and inform him I'm bringing Talia to Camp Halfblood. The likelihood of Talia joining the camp has always been high since her birth, though not until she was older. Kids as young as Talia don't typically go there unless there's no other choice. Kids who have no homes, and have been abandoned by their parents, much like the situation she's currently in. Naruto nodded, taking a bite from his s'more. Camp Halfblood, of course, he was aware of the existence of the camp. Located on Long Island, Camp Halfblood was one of the few places in the world that acted as a haven for the demigods. Somewhere where they didn't need to look over their shoulders every 5 minutes, and where they could meet people like themselves and build real relationships. He'd never seen it, but Hestia told him a few stories about some of the people that went there. He met a fair few of them as well, though none were aware of his real identity. Frederick Bartholdi, Harriet Tubman, Amelia Earhart, William Shakespeare, just to name a few. It was a place where kids like Talia could learn to control whatever gifts they inherited from their godly parent, and learn how to fight. If he was honest with himself, though Camp Halfblood sounded ideal, he didn't like the idea of children as young as Talia learning how to wield a sword and fight monsters. The people of today weren't like the people from past cultures. They certainly weren't like the people of his era. The two were like night and day. Teaching children to fight and kill at such a young age could have harmful consequences on how said children grew up in the world. You only had to look at Kakashi, or Itachi, to see the lasting effect it had on them. There was a reason Old Man Third Hokage ensured no genin left the ninja academy any younger than 12 after the events of the Uchiha massacre. Children that young shouldn't have to worry about wielding a sword. They shouldn't have to go to bed feeling pleased that they managed to survive one more day, before turning fearful about what the next day might bring. Camp Halfblood, though it would be a place Talia would eventually have to visit when she inevitably embraced her heritage, didn't feel like the right fit for someone barely out of diapers. It's better than the first option, though she's a bit young to learn how to kill monsters, he mumbled before asking, what's the third option? Finishing another bite from her s'more, Hestia fluttered her eyelashes. Are you sure you want to hear it? Naruto gave her a look. Fine, fine. The third option is she stays here with you. You raise her, protect her, and teach her how to defend herself when the time comes. Oh, is that all? Naruto feigned surprise. You don't ask for much, do you? It's not like you haven't done it before. That was a long time ago, he replied, looking away. A pretty little blonde girl with big blue eyes flashed across his mind. She was a cute little thing, though she didn't stay that way. She grew up and became a formidable warrior in her own right. She was more likely to run a spear through you if you earned her ire, 500 years ago. Not to mention, she wasn't even a demigod from the Greek pantheon. She was from the Norse. I know you guys don't like to mingle. He waved his hands in the air. A demigod's a demigod, no matter where they're from. Just like monsters are still monsters, no matter what form they take. Hestia reminded him. What was her name again? Naruto turned his head her way. Gunilla. Ah, yes. Hestia nodded. I remember. She was a cute one if I remember right, and a daughter of thunder, much like Talia is. Thor was never more annoying than he was while Gunilla was under my care. He used visiting her as an excuse to pick a fight. Naruto sighed and fell backwards until he was looking up at the ceiling. Could he look after another demigod again? I don't know, Hestia. Hestia giggled, and soon found herself staring up at the ceiling with her blonde best friend. Would it be that bad? I don't know. Maybe. His thoughts turned to all the times his customers would visit the fox's den with their kids. They gravitated to him, and vice versa. He would pull silly faces at them, and make them food that wasn't even on the menu if it's what they wanted. It never bothered the parents, simply cause it was keeping the kids happy. He liked to think it all stemmed back to him being a father. He loved being a father when Boruto and Himori were born, despite how terrifying it was. When he took Gunilla in, it was because he saw a little girl who needed love and attention. He treated her like she was his own. It helped that he got on with her godly father, despite his unnatural love for fighting and causing a mess. However, another reason was that he didn't want children growing up the same way he did, alone and without a family by your side. I made it a point not to reveal myself to the world unless necessary. I keep myself to myself because it's easier that way. Meeting you had been a happy accident, one that I'll never regret. Meeting Norse gods were the same, despite some of them trying to poke me full of holes. He sighed and rested the back of his head on the carpet. I'm tired, Hestia. I miss home. I miss my family. I shouldn't be here. His words came out as a whisper, but Hestia had heard him. Reaching over with a free hand, she wove her fingers through his and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She pops up every now again, you know, more so recently, since I moved to New York. She has this habit of appearing in my mind whenever things seem to be going well. Do you think she's waking up? A lace of fear etched into Hestia's voice. To her relief, Naruto shook his head. He shook his head. She stirs from time to time, but not since the 1940s have I felt it. I'd know if she's awake. He put down the rod holding the half-eaten s'more and patted his chest. I'd feel it if I did. That woman and I have linked thanks to the curse she put on me. Many would see immortality as a gift. She didn't intend it to be a gift. She never did. His gaze hardened up at the ceiling. I wouldn't give her what she wanted, so she took everything from me. He turned and looked at Hestia, his eyes shifting from anger into sadness. Taking Gunilla into my care was one thing. When she died, Odin turned her into a Valkyrie. When Talia dies, she goes to the underworld, and I never see her again. I'm inviting more pain into my life, and there's enough in there as it is. Hestia rolled onto her side. True, but would you turn away a child in need of help? That's not the Naruto I know. Despite his words, Hestia knew her friend too well. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He couldn't help himself when it came to helping people. It was like he was hardwired that way. Something inside him wouldn't allow him to walk away from a situation where he could make a difference. Somewhere he could turn a negative into a positive. I think that's what people used to call my hero complex. I can't help but meddle, even when everyone else avoids it. He shook his head and laughed to himself. A good quality to have. Shame more people don't have it, I guess. He let out another sigh, before pushing himself back into a sitting position. Hestia quickly joined him, watching as the cogs in his mind started turning. She could tell he was always pondering over the idea, letting it sink in, picturing the potential outcomes of letting a demigod of Thalia's caliber remain with him. I'd have to come public to your family if I do this, he said, to your brother at the very least. He should know where she is, even if he doesn't pay her the attention he should. He didn't need another thunder god trying to pick a fight with him. One was enough. Zeus shouldn't be an issue. Despite his reputation when it comes to his daughters, he does develop soft spots for them, Hestia revealed, thinking on all the times Zeus coddled and spoiled Artemis and Athena when they were young goddesses. Luckily, next month is June. Zeus will be celebrating his anniversary to Hera, which will put him in a positive mood. How positive? So positive that it's the only time in the year that the gods can request practically anything from him within reason. And he'll say yes. It was hilarious to watch, and Hestia found herself in a fit of giggles whenever she saw the queue of immortals lining up outside of Zeus's temple, taking the virginity of his beautiful and faithful wife every year thanks to Hera's sacred bath within her temple always put a spring in his step. Once she saw him dancing along the streets of Olympus, because he was in such a good mood. There's no better time. I'll bring him to the Fox's Den in June. Underworld, come on, we need to head back before your father begins to notice our absence, Hecate replied, halting, and turning around to look at Melano. The goddess of ghosts was stood in the middle of the path, watching as the gates that housed the old ones came to close. Melano, are you listening? I know. Her reply came out as little more than a whisper. I'm just wrapping my head around everything that happened today. It's a lot to take in. The amount of information she received about the mysterious blonde was overwhelming. On the one hand, she was grateful she was able to speak to the people that knew him best, his wife, his children, his parents, everyone who could tell him about the different aspects of his life, the ups and the downs, his childhood, which led into his teenage years, and then into adulthood. She felt she might know the man better than himself. His parents couldn't help much given they died young and on the day he was born, but his wife, Hinata, had been a treasure trove of knowledge. They were understandably suspicious at first, but steadily opened up when they realized she meant no ill will to them or Naruto. Jiraiya, despite his initial friendliness, and the woman with the giant melons hadn't spoken much. Most of the time they watched and listened, their gaze locked on the pair of goddesses like a homing beacon. Tsunade had pitched in when needed, and Melano couldn't help but feel the maternal worry that came off the blonde woman. Given Kushina had died the day Naruto was born, Melano would hazard a guess that Tsunade had taken it upon herself to play the maternal role in his life. She mentioned how she once had to tie him to a chair and ordered a woman named Shizune to force-feed steamed vegetables into his mouth. When she punched her fist into her other hand, both goddesses had the feeling Tsunade was the kind of a person who enjoyed tough love. What will you do now? Melano sighed and scratched the back of her head. What should she do now? There was an immortal from the golden generation waking amongst modern society, and the gods had no idea he existed. For something to go amiss from her extended family on Olympus, and remain out of the sight from the gaze of Zeus was laughable. Her father's brother was suspicious of anything that didn't belong, especially when they had power. Whether he had power along with his immortality was a question mark. This power called chakra that the old souls could wield sounded like something out of a storybook, and yet the way they described it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Mortals who could use that type of power felt wrong, like the everyday person wouldn't be able to handle having that kind of power at their disposal. It was no wonder the old souls lived in a time of constant bloodshed and espionage, where nations and people were overflowing with hubris and greed. If people of today could use chakra, then she could picture the wrathful Earth Mother awaking from her slumber to punish humanity once again. I don't know, Melano muttered. She turned around and caught up with Hecate. Instead of waking along the olden path again, the bodies of the two goddesses began to light up. In the blink of an eye, the pair disappeared from the gates and reappeared within the palace of Hades. They stood in Melano's quarters, with Hecate watching as Melano sundered over to the foot of her bed and promptly dropped herself on top of it with all the grace of a newborn duckling. I should tell my father. That wasn't surprising, given all but one of the old souls were within his realm. The god of the underworld would want to know how one of the old ones wasn't claimed by his domain.
And what do you think Hades will do? Hecate asked. It's hard to say. There's still a couple of months until Mother comes home, so his mood will be gloomy at best. The queen of the underworld was one of the few people who could bring Hades out his shell, and bring down the iron walls Hades put around himself. She always had the most success, followed closely by the mother of the elder gods. I'd tell her first before I'd tell father. She's always been good at cooling down his temper. Hecate hummed, and crossed her arms. Hades has never been the type to act first, and ask questions later. That's always been Zeus, and occasionally, Poseidon. Your father is far more patient than either of them. He waits and watches before deciding if he needs to act. I think you give him far too much credit. I think you don't give him enough. Melano rose an eyebrow. Well then, what do you think I should do with this information? She asked. Despite being the daughter of the god of the underworld, Hecate had known him much longer. She was a good judge of character. It was why she spent so much time in the underworld. I think you should go to Hades, and fill him in on what's happened today. He won't like getting left out of the loop, Hecate replied, pulling her face and tapping her chin. I can't help but wonder what he would do. The goddess of ghosts scoffed and gave a look of disbelief to the older immortal. Seriously, to her surprise, the goddess of magic shrugged. Honestly, it's up to you what you want to do with the information you acquired today. I was along for the ride, and you didn't disappoint. However, I think this is where I'm going to jump off from the train. A sly smirk graced the face of the most mysterious goddess of the Greek pantheon. Melano could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Was she bailing? After making such a fuss earlier in the day? You can't be serious. Hecate had appeared so interested and curious about finding out the secrets of the mysterious blonde, despite having never met him. She could be so flighty at the most unhelpful times. You're leaving? After everything we've heard today, I'm deadly serious. Today was a nice change of pace, but I think I'm ready to go back to my daily routine. You know, being all mysterious and aloof. I have a reputation to uphold after all. Hecate spun around, and Melano could sense the energy building up inside of her. She was about to teleport again, but gave Mino one final piece of advice. Don't be a pansy, Melano. Go to your father, and see what happens. Maybe he'll surprise you, like the mist she controlled. She vanished, leaving Melano alone with her thoughts. I will never understand that woman, she muttered to herself, staring at the spot where Hecate previously stood, before falling back onto the bed. She now had a decision to make. Did she tell her father, or does she continue down the road alone? The goddess of magic wasn't as keen as she began to hope, leaving her wondering if she should have left the mystery of Naruto Uzumaki alone. Was she too far down the rabbit hole, or was there time to dig her way out? She had a lot of thinking to do. Days later, the fox's den, telling a little girl that her mother had abandoned her on the doorstep of a stranger was not an experience Naruto looked forward to. He expected plenty of tears and wailing.
Maybe some small objects getting thrown his way. There wasn't much a 4-year-old could do to hurt him, except for breaking his tender heart with cuteness. Despite that, in terms of breaking the news to the little girl, he thought the ordeal went rather well, all considering. At least he thought so. It was a boon that Hestia remained with him all through the night, going back and forth on the goings-on in their lives since they last met with one another. Goddesses like Hestia didn't need much sleep compared to mortals, and being a ninja forced himself to adjust to remaining awake during sensitive and urgent missions. You could ill afford to get caught by a rogue ninja whilst asleep. When the clock struck at 9 o'clock in the morning, he chose to coax his new ward out of her bed with the delightful smell of bacon. The greasy food had the desired effect, and not 5 minutes later, a tired and half asleep Talia Grace tiptoed into the kitchen. A pillow was still resting in her arms, with half her face obscured as she refused to leave all of the divine warmth of her bed. Both Naruto and Hestia found themselves cooing at the sleepy state. Oh, the demigod. How could anyone not at summon image? Good mornings were sent her way, and Naruto soon found himself sat beside little Talia, with Hestia taking up the other side. Together, they had come up with a story for a Talia here, one that would ease Talia into the new life she was about to enter. He told her Beryl had woken up late last night when she was still asleep and asked Naruto to look after Talia for her before slipping away. That she was unable to look after Talia anymore and would have to leave her in Naruto's capable hands. There were some half-truths to the story, and he didn't feel it was right to tell her that her mother hated the fact that she was born. That was too cruel to place on someone so young. Some sniffles began to break out as expected, with Naruto placing a comforting hand on the little girl as the information tried to sink in. It was a wonder how much Talia understood at such a young age. He got down on one knee, and gently wiped her eyes as the skin beneath the eyes turned a blotchy red, gentle shushing her, and to his mild surprise, he found the little girl shuffling out of her chair and came to rest on his knee, burying her face into his shirt. The looks Hestia gave him was one of amusement at his surprised face before steadily wrapping Talia up in a comforting hug. He couldn't deny, for a moment, he imagined it was Himori sitting in his arms, her dark hair tickling the skin beneath his chin. He took a few deep breaths, before gently tilting her head to face his, and gave her the warmest smile he could muster. It had the desired effect, as the little girl gained a twinkle in her eye and the tiniest smile as her new carer shrouded her in love and warmth. Then he introduced her to Hestia. It was safe to say the second they were met, Hestia became Thalia's favorite person in the world. How's that? That's very good, though you've still gone out of the lines a little. One here, Hestia said, looking over the page in the coloring book she and Talia were working on together, and 2 more down here. She pointed at the bottom of the page, where the bright green and yellow elephant they spent the last 15 minutes coloring in, showing some of the colors going over the black lines. AWW, Talia pouted, her face scrunching up and giving her best attempt at a glare towards the green and yellow elephant. The reaction made Hestia giggled, before placing a comforting hand on the top of her dark hair. Don't fret, honey. The elephant still looks wonderful. You can't even tell. You have to lean in very close to see it. See, proving her point, Hestia leaned into the point where her nose was touching the surface of the paper. I guess. The 4-year-old still didn't sound convinced. Can we try another picture, and I'll get it right this time? The goddess of the hearth nodded. Sure, honey. Which one would you like to try? She turned the pages of the book, flicking through as she searched for an animal they hadn't colored in yet. Shall we try and color the lion? Or maybe we could color the alligator? The little girl shook her head. Nah, the sound came out like a sheep bleating, forcing Hestia to bite her lip from busting out a loud laugh. Thalia's blue eyes looked through each page for a couple of moments at a time before finally finding one that caught her attention. This one. Hestia looked down at the page and smiled. A fox, yeah. It looks like Mr. Naruto. The goddess giggled again. Leave it to a child to point out something so funny and ironic. I guess you're right. I think it's the whiskers, she whispered, tapping the page with her finger. Yeah, Talia whispered back, nodding enthusiastically. She fell into a fit of giggles, joining her aunt and laughing together. What are you two giggling about? They heard, looking up from the table to find Naruto standing next to their table. Their table sat in the corner of the room, closest to the counter at the front of the house. The fox's den was half filled on a Saturday, though the blonde found himself busy beyond words earlier in the day. It was only in the last hour where things started to calm down. Talia and Hestia arrived 30 minutes ago, bringing with them a coloring book and a pack of crayons Hestia had bought for her niece a few days ago. By the look on the little girl's face, she was eager to make a start on her new book, though she made sure to give Naruto a big hug when they walked in and cheerily greeted him. The action warmed his heart and made his smile widen before escorting them to a free table. She was settling in nicely. Nothing, just girl stuff, Hestia replied and was quickly mimicked by her niece. Yeah, girl stuff. Mr. Naruto being nosy, he is, isn't he? Talia Hestia replied, giggling at Thalia's words. Naruto was right about her niece. She was very cheeky, but in an endearing way. You-ha, chuckling, Naruto didn't press. Instead, he lowered the tray and rested it on the table. All right, be that way. I've got your lunch for you, so pack your crayons away. You can draw some more after you've finished. It surprised him how quickly he fell back into parent mode. Sure, there was some rust. It was more than 5 centuries since he last cared for a little one. With Gunilla, the little girl tested him for the first couple of weeks. It was the child's way of seeing if this new adult in their life was going to stick around, or if they were going to turn tail and run away. It was the same process when a divorced, or widowed parent brought home their new significant other. Oh, the daughter of Thor has tested him, his patience, his limits, his sanity. After weeks of acting like a tiny tyrant, something finally clicked in their relationship. When she realized he wasn't going anywhere and he was there to stay, the walls disappeared, and a very different little girl was left standing before him. Talia didn't need to be told twice. She packed her crayons into a neat pile and closed her coloring book. Settling her plate in front of her, Talia licked her lips. Yummy, well, I hope so. 1 plate of French toast with strawberries and syrup. Next, he placed a small cup of darkish yellow liquid to the side, and 1 freshly squeezed glass of apple juice. Enjoy, Talia. The little girl's eyes lit up. She picked up her cutlery but stopped when Hestia gently tapped her hand. What do you say? A big smile lit up Thalia's face. Thank you, Mr. Naruto, you're very welcome. Talia. He ruffled the top of her head and felt her lean into his touch. You know, you don't always have to call me Mr. Naruto. Just Naruto will be fine. Okay, Mr. Naruto. The blonde chuckled again and left the little girl to eat her lunch. It was a title he was probably going to be stuck with for a while, though he didn't mind. Grabbing the other plate, he settled it down in front of Hestia, who was having French toast and strawberries as well, with the addition of dices of banana. The portion on the plate was larger than Thalia's, and cut to perfection. Here's your lunch, and here's your drink. A mug of freshly brewed tea took up the spot next to her plate. The distinct scent of strawberry and vanilla wafted through the air, making Hestia hum in delight. Smells delicious. British origin, Japanese. No one makes tea like the East, Naruto replied. How's your morning been? It was good, thank you. We went to the mall, and I'm pleased to say Thalia's wardrobe is now full. You won't have to worry about clothes or shoes for a while, Hestia replied. You owe me one. I know. I won't forget, Naruto said back. He'd asked Hestia to help with the wardrobe situation since he was none the wiser on what would be best to get someone like Talia in modern society. He hadn't shopped for clothing for a little girl since Himori was a little girl, and even then, Hinata had been the one with the eye for such things. Buying clothes for boys was one thing, but buying for a girl wasn't, an entirely different matter. Not wanting to get the wardrobe situation wrong, he left it in Hestia's capable hands. This going to be an adjustment, that's for sure. Hestia smiled, taking a bite of her lunch. I wouldn't worry. As you said, you're rusty, but that rust will wear off eventually. Next time, you can come with us, and I'll show you some pointers. Thanks. I'll be taking you up on that. And when does her new wardrobe arrive? Tomorrow. The guy at the store said it'll arrive in 3 days, and that was 2 days ago. He didn't give me a specific time except that it will be in the morning. Just means I'll have to leave. He leaned in so Talia didn't hear him. A clone to sign the paperwork and help get it up the stairs, since Talia was now living with Naruto permanently. The blonde decided to turn the guest room she'd been staying into hers. The little girl had been excited at the prospect of having such a large room. It was twice as big as her previous one, and the bed was much bigger than her old one. Watching the way she would wriggle around in her sleep, her new bed could easily accommodate. They bought new covers and sheets for her, ones that were dark blue and white and comfortable to the point Talia would fall asleep the moment her head touched the fabric. He quickly realized Talia was the type of person who enjoyed having lots of pillows and added a few more for her to enjoy. While they were out, he left some clones behind to give the walls a new lick of paint. All 4 walls were painted light blue, similar to the sky on a sunny day. The carpet was the only part that remained the same. A toy chest had been added, with a few welcoming gifts from himself and Hestia, while a row of stuffed animals of different varieties adorned the top of the chest. Thus far Talia was in love with her new room. His reward had been the biggest hug the little girl could muster and continued to give him when she saw an opportunity. The last piece he added was a nightlight that shone star shapes on the walls. Last night, when he stopped by her room to check on her, he found her with her limbs spread out like an eagle, a goofy smile on her face as she slept the night away. "I think you've got a customer trying to wave you over," Hestia told him, nodding over to a woman trying to get his attention from across the room. "So I do," he replied, "duty calls. Let me know if there's anything else you want for lunch, you two. I'll be back shortly." With that, he continued his day, leaving the aunt and niece duo to their lunch. "Okay." The reply from Talia came out muffled, her mouth full of French toast. A slight look of admonishment came off the goddess of the hearth, who flicked her niece's ear. She was always a stickler for manners. She would do the same for her godly nephews and nieces whenever she caught them. Everyone knew to be on their best behavior when in the presence of the goddess of the hearth. "Don't speak when your mouth is full, Talia. It's bad manners," Talia started to say, before getting cut off by the look on her aunt's face. The 4-year-old had enough sense to swallow her food first, before replying, "Okay, Auntie Hestia, good girl. What are we doing later, Auntie?" "I'm not sure. I don't have to go home until this evening, so we've got all afternoon." Hestia threw some ideas around, hoping it tickled the fancy of her niece. "We could go for a walk in Central Park. There's this lovely ice cream stand we could try if you're good. The weather is very nice today." Apollo must have been in a good mood, and the goddess could only imagine what had put him in one. Or better yet, who? "Can I have chocolate ice cream?" "Of course. I bet chocolate is your favorite, right, Yuha?" "It's the best," Talia said back, a moment away from taking another big bite of her French toast. "What's your favorite, Auntie Hestia?" "My favorite? Oh well, I love vanilla." Her answer didn't sit well with Talia, who made a face. "What's that face for, huh? What's wrong with vanilla?" "Vanilla's boring." "Boring?" she questioned, a smile tugging at her lips again. "Yup, it's the most boring ice cream in the whole world. Old people like vanilla." Hestia tried to contain her laughter, but couldn't hold it with her best efforts. Her niece said the funniest things, and she didn't even know it. Technically, she was older than all the mortals currently sat in the fox's den, along with the rest of the block. The only person older was Naruto, who was none the wiser to Thalia's little comment as he carried 2 plates of red velvet cake to an older gentleman and his wife. "Then what do you think I should get?" she asked, as her niece was the apparent expert in all things ice cream related. "Chocolate, and what if I don't want chocolate?" Talia pouted, her lips puckered as a thoughtful expression wove onto her face. She got cuter and cuter by the second. Gods, she was beginning to think like Aphrodite. Talia would find herself wrapped up in the goddess of love's arms, being gushed over and spoiled with no end in sight. That wasn't to say Hestia hadn't spent the last few days doing just that on Talia since her arrival into Naruto's life, but the most sensual immortal on Olympus had a habit for taking it too far. Thalia's bedroom would be overflowing with stuffed animals and all things cute and fluffy. The little girl would be decked out in nothing but pink dresses whether she liked them or not. "Strawberry, strawberry," Hestia repeated, thinking over the choice. "Well, I do like strawberry. That's my second favorite, mine too. Are you sure I can't have vanilla?" "Nope. Even if I say please." Talia shook her head, forcing Hestia to let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, all right then. Have it your way." Talia giggled, and Hestia soon found Thalia's arm wrapped around her waist. A pair of bright blue eyes stared up at her with a look of wonder. The hug was a surprise, but not unwelcome, and Hestia soon found herself reciprocating. Wrapping one arm around Thalia's shoulder, her hand came up and delicately wove her fingers through her dark locks. "This is nice," she heard Talia whisper. "I like your hugs, Auntie Hestia." "Well, thank you, sweetie. I like your hugs too." "Goodness, I've been getting so many hugs over the last couple of days. I feel spoiled." Hestia smiled and watched as Thalia's smile widened. Her niece was such a happy child. A demigod that was happy was a rare thing to see, even when they were this young. "I love you, Auntie Hestia." The words flowed out of Thalia's mouth easily and would have caught her off guard if she hadn't heard it a few times today already. For Hestia, the last few days with her niece had felt most peculiar. Unlike Hera, Demeter, Poseidon and Hades, Hestia's had perfect recollection of the moment Kronos swallowed her whole, forcing her to grow up deep within his stomach. To this day, she could still remember the abyss that was her father's throat, like a pit of despair and cruelty with no end. The screams of her mother when she realized what Kronos was doing haunted her to this day, sending chills across her body. The agony in Rhea's voice had been unbearable, like something out of a nightmare come to life. She could only imagine what her mother had felt at that moment.
To this day, Rhea wouldn't talk about it. The pain was always there. Her husband's greatest betrayals. The moment the man she chose to commit herself with showed his true colors. She had a lot of time to think about the life she wanted to have if she ever escaped her father's stomach. She didn't want to experience the same agony her mother felt. She didn't want to feel the loss of a child and watch as they were ripped away by someone who was supposed to love them. If Hera and Demeter wanted to create life from their bodies, then she would help them through it as an older sister should. However, that choice was not one she wanted for herself. She didn't have the maternal element inside her as they did, and that grew as centuries went by. She didn't want children. She didn't want a husband. She didn't want any of it. She chose to remain an eternal virgin because she saw no value in having those elements in her life. She didn't view herself as maternal, nor did she want a husband to commit herself to. She was happy to be nothing more than a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a friend. She was content with the life she created for herself. She saw no need to add anything new to her life. And then Naruto stepped back into her life, bringing with her this little ball of energy that captured her heart near instantaneously. Thalia was like a breath of fresh air. For someone immortal, the days, months, and years started to feel the same. It became repetitive. Even Hestia found herself growing bored in recent years. Naruto was her saving grace during her many visits and never failed to liven everything around him. Thalia, she felt, was the same way. They were like two peas in a pod meant to find one another. Love you too, sweetie. Later that evening, okay, let me see those teeth, Naruto asked, standing in the bathroom opposite Thalia's room. Said little girl was standing on a small red pedestal so she could reach the mirror and watch as she brushed her teeth. No child, no matter what age they were, enjoyed brushing their teeth. It seemed to be universal, no matter what era. Kids just found it to be the biggest chore, second only to tidying their room. Good dental hygiene was key, and no one liked the result of not taking care of your teeth. He would rather be used as a training dummy for students at the Ninja Academy than go to the dentist. Tooth pain was one of the worst sensations imaginable, and if there was one thing he was going to teach Thalia while she was under his roof, it was to take good care of her pearly whites. Thalia opened her mouth wide in an exaggerated manner. The daughter of Zeus was dressed ready for bed, wearing a set of grey pajamas with a happy-looking cloud on the front, courtesy of Hestia. She scrunched her face at the idea of anything pink. Any piece of clothing Hestia picked out that had a shred of pink on them, Thalia immediately shook her head. The 4-year-old didn't like the color one bit. It was a good thing she wasn't a daughter of the goddess of love. Such a mindset on the color pink was almost illegal for a child of the goddess of love. Naruto took a brief look, wearing an exaggerated expression before nodding happily. He was about to ruffle her hair but stopped himself. He finished combing her hair minutes earlier after drying her off from her bath. All right, let's head to bed. Nodding, the little girl jumped off the stool and bolted for her bed. The bed was massive and far bigger than anything a girl her age would be sleeping in. Thalia thought it was the comfiest bed in the world. Following after her, he arrived in her room as Thalia was jumping under the covers, watching as she warmed up the bed. Her face popped up from the top of the duvet and promptly began cocooning herself within the soft sheets. The blonde shook his head and came to sit down on the edge of the bed. A side lamp sat on a small table to the left of the bed, bathing a healthy glow across the room. So, Naruto asked, looking down at Thalia with a fond gaze, which companion will be sleeping with you tonight? Across the room sitting opposite the bed was a line of stuffed animals facing the bed, varying in sizes on top of a toy box. Though Hestia had shopped for clothes, Naruto had taken a brief break from running the fox's den, leaving it in the capable hands of his clones, to get a couple of stuffed toys for Thalia. By a couple, he meant a dozen. He may have gone a little overboard. Thalia put her hands up in the air. Henry, I want Henry. What, the magic word? He gave her a knowing look that Thalia was quickly beginning to recognize after a couple of days. Please see, smiling, he crossed the room and picked up Henry, a purple elephant that sat in the middle of the toy box. Why Thalia dubbed the elephant Henry was anyone's guess. However, the daughter of Zeus had fallen in love with the stuffed toy the moment her eyes met his sewn buttoned ones. She always took his to bed with her and was seldom without him when they were at home. The only rule was that Henry had to remain at home. He didn't want the stuffed toy to end up lost like so many other stuffed animals. You know, your other stuffed animals are going to get jealous if you keep picking Henry. What about Seymour? Seymour was a green eagle, placed at the end of the row. Where Thalia came up with these names, they wished they knew. Hestia had been there for that one and was forced to hide her face in her hands from how hard she was cracking up. Of all the names Thalia could have picked for her father's sacred animal, Thalia shook her tired head.
He's the lookout, yeah, he keeps everyone safe. Naruto raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Mr. Naruto, Talia said, with Henry comfortably sat in her arms. When's Auntie Hestia coming back? A yawn broke out from the little girl, and he watched her eyes already beginning to fall heavy with sleep. Not for a couple of days. Auntie Hestia has some odd jobs she needs to get out of the way back home. Oh, Talia replied, leaning on her side with her chin resting on Henry's head. What kinda jobs? Can I help? A hand reached out and gently patted her shoulder. Just grown-up jobs. You know, like I do at the cafe. Your Auntie Hestia is a chef just like I am, and there are lots of people that love her cooking. They love it so much they line up in the streets just to get a bite. Really? She asked, half in wonder and a half in exhaustion. Does she make yummier snacks than you do? The blonde released a low chuckle. She likes to think she does, was all he said with a wink. Whether his words reached Talia, he didn't know. The daughter of Zeus was asleep in seconds, her body steadily rising and falling with the bed covers. Chuckling, he quietly stood up and tiptoed out of the room, flicking on the nightlight as he left. Making his way into his bedroom down the hall, he closed his door with a delicate thud. Taking a deep breath, his soft blue eyes grew serious. Stopping at his wardrobe, he opened the doors and knelt on one knee. Running a hand over the smooth bottom, he knocked twice on the wood and watched as the surface propped up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Prying the top off and setting it beside him, he reached and pulled a familiar pair of uniquely designed chakra blades, the same ones formerly owned by the chain-smoking Jonin, that was taken from their world far too soon. The weapons had last been in the care of Mirai Sarutobi when they fell into his possession. Somehow, the chakra blades survived the destruction caused by the Great Shift, the day everyone he knew and loved was taken from him in an instant. It took a year of searching through the debris of his old home before he came across them by chance. The blades were one of the few items he kept with him, while others he found were locked and stored away in a safe location known only to him. Now that Thalia's asleep, let's deal with our guests, he thought, and before heading over to the window, quietly opening it so not to spook them, he jumped out and put his old shinobi skills to good use. Outside quiet, you fool. Are you trying to scare our meal away? Kelly screeched, her forked tongue darting in and out of her mouth as she glared at her underling and fellow impouser. I'm trying, but you said not to fly. My hoof isn't meant for traveling across the top of a tiled roof, Tammy hissed in reply, trying failing to keep her balance as the pair neared their target. The impouser, who were servants and creations of the goddess Hecate, had been traversing through the West District of Manhattan when the most delicious smell wafted up their nose. The scent was like a divine hammer knocking their senses time after time and pulled them like a magnet attracting metal. How long had it been since a demigod with such a delectable scent had crossed their paths? 50 years? 60? They weren't sure, but they both agreed it had been far too long. Try as they might, the pair had tried to resist temptation. The scent, however, overwhelmed their senses quicker than either could think. A scent this strong could only belong to a child of the elder gods, specifically, one of the big three. Even monsters such as they had heard that a child of the Olympian king and sky god had come into existence, though neither imagined they would cross paths with the child under the nose of Mount Olympus. It was unwise to insult an elder Olympian like Zeus, but the scent of his daughter, the girl, was mouth-watering. It was just too sweet to ignore. The girl was unassuming, and being so young meant she had no idea of the power and potential she held. It would be easy picking, and the blonde adult they saw walking her home would pose little to no threat. It was an easy meal, and one too good to pass up. The only issue they would face was who got the larger share of their prize, and who got the scraps. Monsters didn't like to share over their kill, especially when it came to demigods. Between the two of them, Kelly often ended up the victor between the pair of impouser and was confident Tammy would submit to her. She was the more vicious of their kind, and would show a level of brutality in her kills that left some wonder if she was the Nemean lion in disguise. I haven't had a demigod in months, Kelly muttered, her long forkish tongue flicking between her lips. Not since the daughter of Hermes in New Jersey. Though her scent wasn't half as delectable as this one, she approached the side of the building and went down onto all fours, her teeth making a loud, chattering sound in anticipation. Her slitted eyes hungered for her prey. Steadily she peered over the side of the house, with the intention of climbing along the exterior walls and climb inside through one of the many windows. You look ready to keel over. Blinking as he lowered her latte to the table, Naruto turned and faced the gazing grey eyes of Athena. Ignoring the crumbs splotched across the side of her lips, the goddess of wisdom arrived at the fox's den 40 minutes ago, this time on her own. Though she invited Artemis, Her younger sister was in the middle of a hunt somewhere out in California, and whatever she was hunting was giving her girls the runaround. The excitement in her sister's voice was enough for her to wish her hunt good luck before settling on leaving Olympus alone. She narrowly avoided a run-in with Aphrodite, hiding her presence from the goddess of love as she skipped her way over to Dionysus's temple. Though part of her wondered why Olympus's resident airhead was heading over to the temple of the family drunk, she chose to leave that question unanswered. She doubted it was anything of significance. Once she arrived, she took up residence in the corner of the room away from prying eyes and made herself comfortable. Her schedule of late was meetings with her servants, her father, and other members of her family. The moment a free afternoon opened up, Athena had only one place in mind to spend her free time. "I'm sorry, I said you look ready to keel over. You look like you haven't slept a wink in days," Athena replied, taking the drink and pushing her empty plate to the side of the table. "Is everything all right?" Straightening his back, he brought up his free hand and rubbed his eyes. Dark purple circles were beginning to form under his eyes like someone had snuck into Aphrodite's enormous collection of cosmetics and smeared purple mascara all around the skin. "I'm okay," he replied, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm tired is all. Haven't been sleeping great, that's all," Athena hummed, trying to ignore the delicious aroma of her drink as it tickled her nose. The goddess didn't believe him. "Tired? That's putting it mildly. You look exhausted." She leaned back in her chair and appeared amused when he attempted to cover his mouth when a yawn tried to escape. "When was the last time you took a break?" A low hum escaped Naruto. "I haven't had the chance yet today. Maybe in an hour, I can have a sit down. The schools will break up for the day soon, and that should give me the time to relax a bit." He wouldn't mind being off his feet for a little bit. Maybe he could have a clone take over in the front, while he put his feet up for 20 minutes in the back room. It was risky since his clones always ran the risk of accidentally dispelling if someone or something knocked into them hard enough. "I don't mean when was the last time you had a sit down." Naruto beneath the table, the goddess tapped her foot against the hardwood flooring. "I should clarify, when was the last time you took a day off?" A chuckle escaped his lips. "I don't have days off. Running the den takes up most of my time." "Then perhaps you should look into making some changes. Working the way you do can't be healthy. It doesn't help that you work alone." "I don't think I have seen another soul working here since my first visit." As much as she loved coming to the fox's den, questions started hovering in the back of her mind, which so far had gone unanswered. Like her sister, Athena had a good thing going at the den, and like Artemis, was developing a soft spot for the blonde owner. He was vastly different from the other mortal men that she met, and so far hadn't made a pass at her like most already would have. He appeared more interested in getting to know her in a friendly manner, making small talk between her orders and listening with rapt attention when she spoke. "I have my Sundays off." A tsk sound came from the goddess. "No, you have half of Sunday off. The other half you're here working." She took another sip of her drink, trying to remain composed as the taste of cinnamon covered her tastabods. "I know you value your work, but I think you should put some thought into closing the den for one day a week. Sunday would work best since you're only open half a day anyway. Not to mention, you wouldn't be the only one who closes on a Sunday." Sunday was known to be a day of rest, and not only because the faux god's religion told people it was so. Sunday had always been a day where mortals would lay down their worries and take a day to relax and put their feet up. For most people, Sunday was their favorite day of the week, while Monday was typically the worst since it began the working week anew. The blonde sighed with one hand coming up to rub his neck. "It would be nice to have a day where I didn't have to think about coffee or pastries other than my own." In the 4 months since he opened up, he was focusing his time on the fox's den 24/7 and left little time for himself. For someone of his unique circumstance, that was hard to do. Working at the den gave him a purpose. Boredom and doing nothing was the enemy, and staying occupied by any means or manner was in his mind the solution. Add a demigod like Talia coming into a mix, and entering his life. "You don't think the customers would mind?" A snort escaped Athena and shook her head. "I think they would be more annoyed if you keeled over during service. Everyone needs rest. Even the best of us." "That's true." He briefly glanced at the window. "I guess I could make up a sign and stick it in the window today. There is still enough time in the day to give people the heads up." The goddess nodded when a thought crossed her mind. "You know, this would all be a lot easier on you if you hired someone to help you." A frown appeared on his face, and she watched as Naruto casually waved the idea away. "Maybe, we'll see." The idea of hiring someone to come in a couple of days a week and help him during some of the busier days had crossed his mind on more than one occasion. The big glaring issue that Naruto had with bringing someone from the outside into the fox's den was having to explain why there were multiple versions of himself working endlessly in the kitchen. His abilities played a role in the upkeep of the den, and bringing someone in would complicate matters. I never said you weren't, but having someone to help carry the load of running a business would help. I'm no businesswoman, but having someone else around, even playing the role of waiter or waitress, would help make things easier on you. Athena wasn't trying to discredit him. Far from it. Thus far, the mortal had done a superb job on running a business all on his own. She didn't want to see her favorite mortal wear himself down. It would help a great deal. I'm just saying, she shrugged nonchalantly. Yeah, I get what you mean, and I appreciate the advice, Naruto replied. I'll think about it. One step at a time, Athena smiled. One step at a time. His eyes drifted away from Athena and down to the book in her hands. The book looked old if the leather-bound cover was anything to go by, but appeared in pristine condition. On the side, he noticed gold stitching and letting, and tilted his head to read the title, The Old Man and the Sea. Athena hummed, confirming his statement and taking another sip of her drink. That's an old one. How far are you? About halfway, but then again, the story is only 127 pages. Athena's free hand came up and traced along the spine of the book. I haven't read it in a couple of years, so I thought I would spend an afternoon re-experiencing it. Though she had another copy within her ever-expanding library within her temple, the one she held in her hands was a gift from Ernest Hemingway himself, who had been one of her demigod brainchildren born at the tail end of the 19th century. Intelligent beyond his year, he'd thrown himself into writing during his time in Paris in the 1920s, and the goddess of wisdom had watched with rapt attention as her son became influenced by the modernist writers and artists of the lost generation. Despite the many stories he produced, The Old Man and the Sea was a favorite of hers. Naruto hummed, taking a scan of the room to check his customers were all satisfied before he quoted. He always thought of the sea as la mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things about her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used boys as floats for their lines and had motorboats, bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as Elmar, which is masculine. The smile on Athena's face widened. They spoke of her as a contestant or a place or even an enemy, but the old man always thought of her as feminine and as something that gave or withheld great favors, and if she did wild or wicked things it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman. When she finished speaking, the goddess couldn't help leaning forward, one arm resting against the top of the table. You've read The Old Man and the Sea? It came out as a statement rather than a question. Regardless, the blonde nodded. Some years ago, as you said, it's a good book. He laughed. What's so funny? It's just, he started, and couldn't help the grin morphing on his face. When I was a kid, I would be throwing a tantrum at the idea of reading a book. Looking back on his youth, Naruto often forgot how much of a knucklehead he was. It was no wonder he got on the nerves of so many of his fellow shinobi, including those he called friends and family. I was a bit of a hothead when I was younger, and the idea of reading a book would have sent me running for the hills. Really? Athena tried to picture Naruto as a kid, and couldn't help inwardly smiling. She imagined a spiky blonde running for the hills while being chased by his teachers. Oh yeah, but I found the value in it as I grew up. A fond smile and a faraway look washed over his face. My godfather was an author, and it was his first book that ignited my enjoyment of books. He chuckled. He didn't have the best of luck with more traditional stories, but did find success in the more risque section. Athena raised an eyebrow. Risque section. Naruto wiggled his eyebrows and gave Athena a look. It took seconds for Athena to understand what he meant. The blonde felt a chill run up his spine, and a frosty look appeared. Her grey eyes turned steely. I see. Athena's thoughts about Naruto started to darken before he put up his free hand. She didn't want to summon her spear. Don't worry, I could barely make it through the first couple of pages. Those kinds of books aren't my taste. Despite Jiraiya's attempts, he never fell to the dark side. So you never got sucked into that vortex of debauchery? Athena muttered and watched him nod his head. Good. That type of literature has no place in the world. It's little more than smut and pornography, though it wasn't to her tastes. That kind of reading was up Aphrodite's alley. The occasions when she found the love goddess with her nose buried between the pages of a book, it was often one of those silly little love stories, and occasionally, straight-up pornography. The air-headed goddess that oversaw the carnal pleasures in life had been the one responsible for showing Apollo the joys of literature, despite her attempts at steering her godly brother away. You don't have to tell me twice, Naruto replied. I keep a set of his books for sentimental value. They've never even left their protective wrapping. Athena nodded, pleased by his words. Good, see that you don't. I would be greatly disappointed if I ever catch you reading such content. I doubt I would be able to call you a friend if I had such information in my mind. My sister would be less than thrilled too. She could already imagine her sister if she ever discovered such a trait in their favorite mortal. She would string you up in the trees and poke you full of holes. Oddly enough, I could see your sister doing that. Naruto tapped his chin. She seems a little scary when crossed. His words brought out a laugh from Athena. Oh, you have no idea. Whatever words the blonde was about to say died in his mouth when he heard one of his other customers call out his name. He must have lost track of time. He'd been standing there talking to the gray-eyed woman for a while. It appears you're needed elsewhere. Looks that way, Naruto replied. The blonde turned to go and serve the other customers before a thought crossed his mind. He turned his head back to Athena, asking, quick question, you called us friends. Would you consider us friends? Athena tilted her head. Her expression read she wasn't expecting the question, though it did make her begin to wonder that herself. As mortals go, Naruto was one of the best she had met in a long time, and the goddess of wisdom had to admit, being in his presence was calming. Not to mention, his culinary talents worked wonders on her tastebuds. Are we friends? She said aloud, thinking it over for a brief moment before nodding. Yes, I think so. I've visited numerous times now, and we've gotten along since day one. Coming here is often the highlight of my day. Do you consider me a friend? I do. Then, I suppose we're friends. A bright smile lit up the blonde's face. In that case, can I ask you for a small favor? Oh, now she was curious. A favor? Well, if it's within my power, then I can try, though it would depend on what it is. It's nothing strenuous if that's what you're thinking, he said back. You see, I've got some new additions I'd like to put on the menu, but I'd like someone to taste them for me. If you're available, then I'd love to. She blurted out her response, before quickly throwing her hands to her mouth. She hadn't meant to reply with such excitement, but her mouth moved on its own before her mind could catch up, a rarity when it concerned a goddess of her status. However, she wasn't going to miss the opportunity for what Naruto was offering. How could she say no? She could only imagine what kind of delicacies he had in mind. Gently coughing into her hand, she straightened her back and regained her dignified look. What I meant to say is that I would be happy to help. Tell me a time, and I will see to it that I'm available. Deep down, Athena wanted the opportunity to lord it over the likes of Artemis and Aphrodite. None of the other goddesses received an opportunity like this, and she wasn't about to turn it down. Though she was one of the more patient Olympians living on Olympus, she was looking forward to rubbing that in their faces. Great. If you're available, how about tonight? I'll close up around 8 as normal. Head over around then. Perfect. I'll see you then. She tried not to sound so eager, but she couldn't deny how excited she was feeling. Evening rolled around quickly, and the goddess of wisdom soon found herself back at the fox's den. The rest of her afternoon had been uneventful, though a brief run-in with Aphrodite led her to believe the goddess of love had discovered her evening plans. The sneaky love goddess had spies and snitches in every corner of the world, like she was some type of lovey-dovey mob boss. Nymphs of every kind flocked to her side with a snap of her fingers, all trying to find favor with the beautiful Olympian. Nymphs enjoyed gossip and spreading rumors almost as much as the deities of Olympus did. Luckily, Dite's attention was elsewhere today, and Athena managed to slip away before the interrogation could begin. The jingle from the bell rang as she entered the fox's den for the second time that day, and Naruto's voice reached out to her from the back room. He must have been in the kitchen preparing for her visit. Athena, is that you? Yes, it's me, she replied, looking around the room. It was strange to see it void of other people. Ever since her first visit with Artemis, the place was always filled with mortals as Naruto's reputation became well known in the West Village area and beyond. The scent of coffee and chocolate still lingered in the air, and a couple of used coffee mugs and plates still dotted around the tables. The last customer must have left mere moments before she appeared. Great, right on time. Take a seat anywhere you like, and I'll be out in a moment, she heard him reply. Can I get you a drink? Athena thought about it for a moment. I won't say no to a regular coffee. She could picture him nodding in the back. You got it. I'll be out shortly. Take your time. Also, could you make it a decaf? You got it. The goddess only waited a couple of minutes before the blonde revealed himself. He appeared the same as he did earlier in the day, though she noticed a fresh new apron wrapped around his waist. Bits of jam and flour covered his wrists, though a towel was held in one hand. He got started on her drink, and it wasn't long before she had the mug sitting between her palms. "Thanks again for doing this. I hope I'm not causing any inconvenience." Athena shook her head, causing a few strands of hair to fall over her face. Naruto never noticed how her hair curled at the end, since the woman tended to have her hair done up in a bun, or a ponytail of some kind. Tonight, her hair was down and swept down one side. He wouldn't voice his thoughts, but he thought the look suited her. He wondered why she didn't do it more often. "It's not a problem. My evening was free, and I wasn't about to turn down the chance to try some of your new additions to the menu." Naruto let out a chuckle. "Well, I can't argue with that." He pointed behind him. "So, I've got a couple of new desserts I'm thinking about adding to the menu. What I need is you to tell me if it's good or not. I want an unbiased opinion, and since day one, you've struck me as someone who will tell it straight." Athena let out a chuckle of her own. "You would be correct. I never saw the need to beat around the bush, as it were." "Well, that's perfect. That's what I'm looking for." Her grey eyes watched him closely as he fidgeted around on the spot. "Just one small thing I want to add." If she looked closely enough, she could have sworn dust of red washed over his cheeks. "I know you can be a little, how we say, vocal when eating food here, and you get embarrassed by it. I want you to know that it's okay if you want to." He made hand motions in the air reminiscent of jazz hands. "I promise. This is a safe space." Athena sputtered a quick response, but the surprise of his words momentarily made her mind stall. Taking a moment to compose herself, she gave him a subtle nod. "I will keep that in mind." He gave a thumbs up. "Okay, I'll go and get the first one." Athena waited until he was out of sight before throwing up her hands and letting out a silent scream. She writhed around on the chair, silently stamping her feet on the floor. "I'm never going to be rid of that damn incident, am I?" One slip up, and it was going to haunt her forever. It was the incident with the flute all over again. At least, this time it was only Artemis who saw her, and she wasn't the type to spread such information around without just cause. She didn't have to be worried about other members of her family finding out, and she doubted Naruto would spread it around. She couldn't have been the only person who'd done such a thing. She composed herself as the blonde returned from the kitchen, a plate on the tips of his fingers. Unknowingly, Athena licked her lips. At first glance, the sweet treat in front of her looks like a cupcake given the size, but the texture looked more reminiscent of a biscuit. On the top of the pastry, a swirl of cream covered the top, with a layer of something dusted over like a gold blanket. Three sat in front of her. "This is a cupcake-size honey cheesecake," Naruto explained, sounding pleased at her reaction. "You're probably wondering what the cream on the top is." Athena nodded. "It's cream mixed with cream cheese and honey. The base is made of biscuits, as is the sprinkles of crumbs dusted over the top. It's a bit different. I'm not even sure how I came up with it. The idea of it just struck me like a bolt of lightning." Athena could do nothing but stare and nod, before finally asking, "How in the world do you come up with these recipes?" "It's beautiful to look at." He gave a small bow and chuckled. "Well, thanks, but ideally, I'd like my customers to eat it, rather than stare at it." The goddess of wisdom let out a low chuckle. "Fair point. Then I should fulfill my part of the deal." Gently, Athena picked up the small pastry between her fingers. In hand, she could feel how delicate the base was. It felt like it would crumble with the tiniest degree of extra pressure. The last thing she wanted to watch it crumble away before her very eyes. Bringing it to her mouth, she took a small bite out of the side, getting enough of the cream to get a real sense of the flavor. She breathed through her nose audibly, and her eyes grew heavy all of a sudden as a burst of flavor took over her sense of taste. As expected, the second she bit down on the pastry, it crumbled away, coating her tongue with the base. Leaning forward, she rested her hand in her free palm, her toes wriggling against the inside of her shoes as she took delight in the dish. "Well?" Naruto asked, waiting patiently. Athena idly glanced at him, too caught up in the cupcake-size honey cheesecake. "Do you even need to ask?" Was her expression not enough? Thankfully, she managed to rein in any audible moans from slipping out. "It's amazing. The honey flavor isn't too overpowering." "Not at all. I'll admit, I don't have honey often, but this was just the right amount. It wasn't too sweet, and the cream, light and fluffy," she replied, "and the biscuit base crumbled as soon as my teeth put the tiniest bit of pressure on it. It was a delightful sensation." "Good, that's good." He looked relieved, and scratched the back of his head. "I was a little worried about this one." "There was no reason to be. You did a wonderful job as always," quickly finishing it off. Athena wiped away the crumbs and splash of cream from her lips. "You get a gold star for plate number 1, he smiled. "Thanks. That's a relief to hear. I've been cooking and baking for a long time, but I still get the jitters when I'm trying something new. Lacing her fingers together, Athena smiled. She did that a lot when she was visiting the fox's den. Something about the company of the man that ran it brought it out of her. I'll go get the next one, he replied, and disappeared back in the kitchen. He was only gone a few short moments, but while the goddess was alone, she dropped her usual facade and punched the air in delight. Her feet repeatedly tapped the ground as she reveled in the aftertaste of the honey cheesecake. It was so good she couldn't contain herself and had to let it out, though when Naruto returned, she quickly regained her composure. Like before, he gently lowered the plate to the table, pushing the first one off to the side. Athena nearly told him to leave it where it was, but her words fell silent as her eyes settled on the second dish. A drinking glass filled with her next sweet treat rested on the top. Unless my eyes are deceiving me, which they rarely do, can I assume I'm looking at a panna cotta? The blonde almost grinned at her guess. You have a good eye. He watched Athena pick it up, looking over it with an analytical look on her face and resting her nose against the rim of the glass. She took one long whiff and felt a shiver of delight run across her skin. A strawberry panna cotta, as you figured out. A panna cotta was an Italian dessert made of sweetened cream thickened by gelatin. The name literally meant cooked cream. It was a dish Naruto hadn't created much of in the past but decided to give it a shot by adding it to his menu. What are these on the sides? Those are homemade salted almond snaps. You can have the panna cotta on its own, but I thought the almond snaps would complement the strawberry flavor. He made a motion towards the spoon. Maybe you could tell me. Maybe I can, Athena fired back, and picked up the spoon. Breaking off a piece of the almond snap, the goddess scooped up some of the panna cotta, and gently placed the snap on top. Panna cotta was not a dish she was overly familiar with, though the ones she had in the past were adequate. Perhaps this one would make the dessert a new favorite of hers. It wasn't a dish her aunt or stepmother had ever presented them on Olympus. She leaned in and chomped down on her spoon. This time, the reaction was a little more vocal, and there was nothing she could do to contain it. Oh, gods, she whispered, one hand coming up to slide down her cheek. Her ankles crossed over the other beneath the table, and her tongue lapped up every little bit of dessert from the spoon. When it finally left her mouth, there didn't appear to be anything left, not even a smear of cream. Naruto tried to speak, but found his mouth clamped shut as Athena grabbed another spoonful and went for a second bite. She hated that she was making noises that sounded so lewd, but she couldn't help it. Naruto told her that he wouldn't tell anyone, so she put her trust in that, and then a third. By the fourth bite, she deliberately took her time. Well, I guess I don't need to ask, huh? Athena shook her head. A minute passed, and Naruto found himself lifting the empty glass of panna cotta. The goddess devoured the dish like there was no tomorrow, so much so, that the inside of the glass looked half clean already from how feverishly she'd eaten it. She made sure to scoop up every last piece she could get her hands on. There wasn't even a sliver of cream left at the bottom of the glass. He was beginning to wonder which was the gluttonous daughter of Zeus. If you don't put that on your menu, then it will be a crime of the highest order, she told him, dabbing her lips with a napkin. She would readily order that again. The cream was perfect. I haven't had a panna cotta in a long time, but I can say this trumps any I've had in the past. From how quickly you polished that off, I'd be foolish to disagree, he laughed. Thanks for saying so. That's another one going on the menu. At this rate, your menu will feel like it has no end. When inspiration hits, you have to go with it. You don't know when it might come back. Athena nodded. I agree. Without a moment's notice, her embarrassment swiftly returned as loud gurgle ran through her stomach. There was little she could do to stop it and felt it travel up her body so quickly, there was no time to cover her mouth. Once the sensation ran along the back of her throat, she knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. A loud and guttural burp escaped her mouth, resonating inside the silent room. It sounded disgusting, like something Ares or Apollo would do. It wasn't something anyone from her family would think she was capable of. Even Naruto's looked surprised, his mouth a tiny O shape. I am so sorry you had to hear that. She threw her hands up to cover her face, hoping it would help her disappear. Gods, why did it always happen to her? Was Titch playing some kind of prank on her? Her luck surely wasn't that bad, was it? She half expected him to turn away in disgust, but instead, he let out a loud bellyful laugh that nearly made her jump out of her seat. She sat there for half a minute, watching in silence as he tried to compose himself. Initially, when he tried to speak, he broke out into a fit of chuckles and resumed laughing, until finally, he managed to get himself under control. He wiped his eyes, a sheen of wetness coating the bottom from his hysterics. I am sorry, he said, waving his hands in the air. His expression still showed he was trying not to crack up. It was just so sudden, and out of nowhere. You caught me by surprise, both of us, if your expression was anything to go by. Athena shook her head and tried to bury her face into her palms again. Instead, she found a gentle hand on her wrist and gently pried it away. Her initial reaction was to blast the man who dared to place his hand on her. The goddess of wisdom wasn't as bad as her sister, but as virgin goddess, she was very particular about who touched her. She had a reputation to uphold after all. The only male she allowed to touch her was Zeus, as she had grown up with her father spoiling her and wrapping her up in those giant arms of his into a hug. Her Olympian brothers tried in the past to get handsy with her, though they all came to regret it. They only needed to be told once, or twice in Apollo's case, and they never tried anything again. The sight of her spear in hand would make all of them turn tail. Her spear could appear in a matter of moments in a brilliant light. It was as easy as blinking when it came to summoning her signature weapon to her. She could skewer the one daring to touch her in a nanosecond. Luckily, she refrained. The soft smile and eyes belonging to her mortal friend were enough to push such thoughts away. "Don't get upset," he said kindly, gently patting her wrist. "I'm sorry my laughing upset you. It wasn't my intention. It just came out. You surprised me, that's all." Athena took a couple of deep breaths. It's fine. It's silly, I know, but..." Athena paused and ran her free hand through her hair. "I don't take embarrassment well. Ever since the incident with the flute all those millennia ago, the goddess has kept a close eye on every little thing she did and said. After every speech and every action, she ensured she didn't hand over any ammunition to her immortal family. She couldn't handle the japes, and being the butt of the joke. To this day, the laughter of her aunts, uncles and siblings still rang through her head from time to time. The curse of being the goddess of wisdom was that she never forgot such things. It was all stored in her memory, like a file cabinet that went on forever. I'm sorry, embarrassment for her brethren, like Apollo, or Hermes, was second nature to them. They used it to their gain and appeared to shrug it off and keep moving forward regardless. It was one of the few things she could say she was envious for lacking. She wished she could just walk away from such things. The chair next to her made a sound, and she found Naruto taking up the seat. "Don't apologize. You don't have anything to be sorry for, I know, but stop right there," he interrupted, cutting Athena off mid-sentence. "Getting embarrassed is nothing to beat yourself up over. It happens to everyone. Just the other day, I accidentally knocked into a customer, and part of their drink fell on their lap. Hot coffee right on their white shirt, stained across the front. The customer was annoyed, and I could feel the stares coming from everyone in the room." She nodded. "I hate that feeling, like people are judging you. Yeah, I can't deny it doesn't suck, but it doesn't last. You think you have to apologize over and over again to make it better when in reality, you should have stopped after the first time. It's in the past. It's history. You have to stay in the present, rather than looking back and thinking about that moment. It was one little incident. After that, the rest of the day went great. You have to stop clinging on to those moments." "I wish it were that easy," Athena replied, sounding a little glum, with Naruto sighing at her reply. This goddess sure could be a Debbie Downer at the smallest of things. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. "You don't always have to be perfect, you know. You're allowed to make mistakes." Athena's eyes widened from his declaration. She stared at him in surprise. She hadn't expected that response. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it hadn't been that. "What do you mean?" It came out little more than a whisper, but Naruto heard her and explained. "We haven't known each other for a long time, but I've met people like you before. You're the type of person who sets unbelievably high standards for themselves. Anything less than achieving that you deem a failure, and embarrassment. Did you know embarrassment belongs to the disorder known as perfectionism? Think about it. You're embarrassed because you didn't live up to your standards, and when an event happens that put us on the spot and doesn't go our way, we panic and become flushed. There is a small, or wide, gap between your expectations of yourself and your performance." Athena did know that, but she didn't voice it. She was too interested in what he had to say. He wasn't wrong about his statement on being perfect. After all, she was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and favorite daughter of Zeus. When everyone else had a problem, they came to her for help. Naruto could see she was listening, and continued, "Embarrassment is also another term for fear. We don't want to be perceived less than the image we desire. You need to have that wiggle room up here, and not let yourself be bogged down by that." He tapped his head. "You don't have to take it personally." She knew that, but she couldn't help it. Her pride wouldn't let her. "What if I can't help it?" He gave her a look. "You can help it, and you can start by not looking at yourself always standing on a pedestal. Things happen outside of our control. That doesn't make us any less than what we are. You make it sound easy it can be if we let it, he replied, and outstretched his hand and patted Athena on the shoulder. Again, the goddess felt the urge to swat his hand away but restrained herself. It felt oddly comforting. The next time you feel embarrassed, hold your head up high and laugh it away. Don't let it weigh you down. It's a single moment. People will forget and move on to the next thing that catches their attention. Athena didn't say anything, but his words rang through her mind. She had the same talk from her Aunt Hestia on multiple occasions in the past. Even Artemis pulled her aside a few times. She took note of their kind words of encouragement over the millennia, but hearing them coming from a mortal held a different weight to them. Here was this person, a being of lesser worth in comparison to an immortal goddess, telling her to stop taking herself so seriously. It was a sobering experience, yet she couldn't deny his words didn't hold weight to them. He was correct, as much as she loathes to admit it. It was hard not to put herself on the pedestal he spoke of. Everyone on Olympus came to her when they had a problem. When something outside her control put the image people had of her at risk, she panicked and fled, whether it was a tiny incident or a big one. Feeling Naruto's kind eyes and smile lingering, Athena took a calming breath, trying to control the flush on her face and the thoughts running through her head. She knew he was only trying to help, for which she was grateful. He really was a unique mortal. I will try, though I don't know how successful I'll be, she admitted, her hands wrapping around her half-empty coffee mug and feeling comfort from its warmth. She watched him raise his hand and noticed it sway in the air as if he was debating with himself before she felt his hand come down on her shoulder. If you ever feel that way again, just come back to the den. My door is always open to you. His smile widened, and Athena tried not to look surprised when he sent a wink her way and quickly removed his hand. Think of this place as a home away from home, somewhere you can decompress. We can even talk about our favorite books if you like. Help take your mind off things. He shrugged, but chuckled when he saw her grey eyes light up. Aye, she started but found herself at a loss for words as she tried to reason with him that he didn't need to go that far. Instead, she settled on just two. Thank you. You're welcome, he replied, ready to keep going. I've got some tasty dishes in the back with your name on them. Athena nodded. I'm ready. Please bring out the next one. Olympus. As the evening came to an end, Athena reappeared within her temple of Olympus, a small and content smile gracing her face. Sitting comfortably in her hands was a white box with a blue ribbon tied around it, containing a gift from the mortal she spent the last hour helping. Choosing to spend the rest of her night in her library and tucking into a good book, Athena kicked off her shoes and replaced them with her favorite pair of grey slippers. Her civilian clothing changed as well, replaced by an oversized light blue hooded jumper and lounge pants. Despite her earlier feelings of annoyance with herself, there was a noticeable skip to her step. He'd thanked her for her help, and insisted she take something home with her. 5 minutes to go, Naruto muttered to himself, a frown on his face as he stared up at the clock. He stood behind the counter in the fox's den, his arms crossed against his chest as he waited for his reservation to arrive. He had no idea what he was in for, but Hestia had told him he was in for quite the experience. She said it all with a straight face, but knew the telltale signs for when she wanted to start laughing. Something of interest was bound to happen within the confines of his workplace, but hadn't the faintest idea what it might be. It all started when he agreed to speak with her nephew, the very same nephew who, months before, had been thrown out of the fox's den because he caught him with a young nymph in a very compromising position. If he had his way, the sun god of Olympus would never set foot in the fox's den again. The shinobi of old could tolerate a lot of things, but he wouldn't allow such behavior when families with young children were known to visit daily. Anyone, such as a small child, could have stumbled upon them while hoping to use the facilities. For anyone else, he wouldn't have considered the notion of letting Apollo back in, but his old friend was convincing. Hestia was a smooth talker when she needed to be, and so, 3 days ago, a sheepish-looking Apollo walked inside the den, and his eyes immediately locked with his own. He rarely came across as unwelcoming, but his stone-faced expression made it clear to the god of the sun that he hadn't forgotten what happened the last time he visited. He wanted to make the Olympian sweat a little, or as much as you can on someone who has divine control over the sun. A small group of satyrs had been visiting at the same time, but the moment Apollo walked inside, they took their drinks and left. While his first impression of Apollo had been less than fruitful, he would admit, his fellow blonde did come across as apologetic for his actions. He couldn't feel any negative emotions coming from the Olympian, nor could he detect any hint of deceit in his apology. It appeared genuine. Knowing Hestia, she likely had a stern talk with her nephew, Or perhaps his twin had threatened him with violence if he didn't go back and apologize. Hestia spoke to him at length what the reaction had been from the other Olympians, and suffice to say, Artemis had glared bloody murder at him every time they crossed paths on Olympus. When he asked what Athena's reaction had been, Hestia had gone ghost white. She wouldn't say what, but apparently, the goddess of wisdom had been harsh. She motioned her fingers into the shape of scissors and made a snip-snip sound. He understood, and they left it at that. He didn't need an image forming in his head. With the apology made and a promise that such an event would never happen again, Naruto had accepted, though warned that he didn't want a repeat in the future. He was on thin ice as it was, and he would be keeping a close eye on him during his visits. Apollo nodded profusely and promised he wouldn't give in to temptation again. The old shinobi tried not to snort at the claim, knowing the sun god's reputation, but agreed nonetheless. Believing the conversation was over, Naruto had started to move away when he noticed the golden god staring at him, remaining in the same spot. Asking if there was something else he could do for him, the Olympian surprised him when he asked if he could book out the fox's den for an afternoon. He explained his sister had done the same thing over a month ago and wanted to do the same. It didn't take a genius to know that Apollo was talking about Artemis. Apparently, the goddess of the moon was bragging about it to her Olympian siblings. Try as he might to keep the smirk from growing on his face, the corners of his lips edged up at the mention of Apollo's twin. She hadn't visited in a few weeks, but he was always on the lookout for her. He was dubious at first. He only just gave the sun god permission to return to the fox's den, and perhaps he was trying to push his luck a bit too quickly. His initial response was to decline the request and wait until Apollo proved himself good on his promises. However, seeing the hopeful look on the immortal's face, and in a good mood after a restful Sunday off, Naruto agreed and allowed it. Like his previous reservation, Naruto briefly disappeared to his office, before returning with his red business diary, and opened it to May. They were in the final week of May, and Naruto hadn't forgotten about the meeting he was due in the coming fortnight. He and Hestia had briefly spoken about it, but little more needed to be said. They knew what needed to happen. All he needed to do was wait until the goddess of the hearth could confirm a date that she would bring her youngest sibling and king. Putting his future meeting with the god of the sky aside, and getting the fees for renting his workplace for the afternoon out the way, he penciled Apollo down in the diary. A party of 5, including Apollo, would dine at the Fox's Den on the Friday of next week and would arrive at midday. There were no dietary restrictions he needed to watch, which was a bonus, and food and beverages would be covered by the fee Apollo already paid. Apollo didn't offer a blank check like Mr. Black, but it was enough to cover his group. It was still more than he expected. Perhaps the sun god was true to his word. Afterwards, Apollo had run out with a giddy expression thanking him and disappearing down the street. That was over a week ago, and the day of said reservation had arrived. Hestia's had agreed to babysit Talia for him, which meant he didn't need to leave a clone in his place to care for her. The little girl appeared disappointed that he wasn't spending the day with them, but her frown quickly turned into a gleeful expression when he promised to take her to the zoo on Sunday. Before leaving the house, she gave him the biggest hug she could muster before running off into the living room, where Hestia was waiting with some more coloring books and new crayons. Patiently waiting and watching as the hands on the clock ticked by, he straightened his back when he felt a flicker of energy come to life down the street. He only had to wait half a minute before the blonde Olympian waltzed on inside. Wearing regular civilian clothes did little to dial back the sun god's natural masculine beauty. His hair tied into a bun like the first time they met and a pair of sunglasses sitting on his face. A backpack was over his right shoulder and appeared in good spirits if the giant grin on his face was any indication. Seeing as this was a fresh start for the pair, Naruto wore a polite smile as Apollo crossed the room, right on time. Midday on the dot. Hey, when I promise something, I keep my word. If I say I'll be there at midday, I'll be there at midday, he replied, taking off his sunglasses and showing off his bright blue eyes. They were practically glowing with excitement. In fact, staring at him, Naruto noticed the blonde Olympian couldn't keep still and was bouncing on the balls of his feet. He looked like a happy golden retriever about to chase his favorite tennis ball. I guess so. He looked Apollo square in the eye. You look like you woke up on the right side of the bed, something like that. It's a beautiful day to be alive. Do you want to know why? Naruto shrugged. Sure, why not? Apollo leaned forward, his grin widening. Because it's game day. He placed his backpack on the ground and wandered over to the tables. Do you mind if I rearrange your tables? I need a specific layout once the rest of the group appear. The old shinobi gave the sun god a flat stare. moving the tables around before he had a chance to answer. A sliver of annoyance flashed through him, but pushed it away. Sure, go right ahead. He paid to rent the den out, and if he wanted to rearrange some furniture, then he could. Walking out from behind the counter, he gave Apollo a hand in moving tables and pushing spares off to the side. Working together, it only took a few minutes before they had the layout he desired. Soon enough, a U-shape of tables formed, while a second table sat in the middle and a third was a few feet in front of them. Naruto found himself curious about what kind of game they were intending on playing. It wasn't like anything he'd seen before. He was about to ask why, when the next person started to arrive. An eyebrow rose on his face, and he tried to repress a smirk from forming on his face as a familiar dark-haired immortal with elfish features appeared through the windows and entered the den. Unlike the last time, he was wearing civilian clothes instead of his postman attire and looked significantly well rested. The dark lines beneath his eyes were gone, leaving only a healthy light-skinned complexion. Like Apollo, a backpack was across his shoulder. Apollo, the sun god, spun around, and both wore expressions of equal excitement. Hermes, the pair of Olympians embraced in a tight hug before both shook their fists in excitement. What day is it? Game day. Hermes ran a hand through his curly dark hair. It's been too long, man. I need my fix. It's all I've been thinking about for the past couple of days. He poked his older brother in the chest with his index finger. You better have something good planned. Hey, it's me. Apollo opened his arms wide. I always deliver on the goods. Don't worry about it. When do the others get here? Any minute now. I only arrived a few minutes ago myself. Nodding, Hermes looked across the room, and only now noticed the blonde shinobi standing there, casually watching as he and his brother conversed. His eyes narrowed, and his face suddenly turned pouty. Naruto could only imagine he was thinking about the last time they met face to face. It's you. Naruto gave a short wave. It's nice to see you again. It's been a while since you were last here. I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to stop by again. Instead of answering him, Hermes turned and looked at his brother. Does he have to be here? Well, he does own the place. Can't really kick him out of his own business. I mean, we could, but then we'd have to deal with Artemis and Athena, and we both know how that will end up for us. Apollo shook his head, and waved his hands in front of him. No thanks. I like being alive. Forgive and forget, Herm. Keep that chin up. He patted his brother's shoulder. The younger Olympian grumbled, but conceded to his brother's point. He had no desire to enact the wrath of the moon goddess again. He had no desire to be on Artemis's shit list even more than he already was. She still hadn't forgiven him for the potato incident and would glare at him whenever they crossed paths, or when he made a delivery to her hunt. I guess, he muttered, looking to and from Naruto and Apollo. Like everyone else who'd visited, he made a note of the similarities between the owner and Apollo. Leaning in, he whispered, "Are you sure he's not one of yours?" Apollo turned and gave Naruto a glance from the corner of his eye, before replying, "I'm pretty sure. I don't feel any of my power lingering within him like the rest of my kids. I think it's just coincidence." He couldn't fault Hermes for asking the question. He wondered the same on his first visit with Aphrodite, before coming to the conclusion he didn't belong to his demigod brood. He doubted Artemis would like him as much as she did if he was. She could be very picky when it came to his kids. If you say so. Hermes looked over at Naruto, who smiled back politely. The Olympian's right hand came up with his middle and index finger forming a V shape and made the "I'm watching you" motion. He wasn't going to let the damn blonde draw another phallus on his forehead like last time. People were still making fun of him because of it. It wasn't long before the pair became a trio. This time a young woman appeared before them, and this one the blonde shinobi didn't recognize. She was short in stature in comparison to the men in the room, barely reaching the middle of their chests. She was young in comparison too. If he had to put a number on her, he would have guessed 16, maybe 17. Either way, she was younger than he was expecting for the intended party. Her hair was long and black like a raven's feather, and tied in a loose-fitting ponytail, and her eyes a shade of brown like melted chocolate. She was a god, he could tell that much, or in this case, a goddess, though didn't expect one to appear so young. Then again, Hestia enjoyed slipping into her child form from time to time. Despite her youth, she was a pretty little thing. The girl took in the room, appearing fascinated by the interior of the room. When she turned and faced the pair of gods that were watching her, she made a couple of steps forward before tripping over her own feet and face-planting right into the wood of the floor. The pair of gods and the shinobi winced at the dull thud that came with impact, and all three made a motion to move forward and help her. To their surprise, her hand came up, telling them to stop. She pushed herself to her feet and huffed in annoyance. All three watched as she dusted herself off before looking back at Apollo and Hermes with a determined look on her face, and held both her fists in the air in front of her. Game day, both repeated and embraced the young girl in a hug, with Hermes adding, "Glad you could make it, Hebe." A look of understanding crossed Naruto's face, though he quickly hid it. Ah, so that's Hebe, he thought. Her appearance now made sense, given her status as the goddess of youth. The youngest daughter of Zeus and Hera, she was a reclusive member of the Greek pantheon when compared to the rest of her siblings. There were few stories about Hebe, with the most prominent being the part she played in aiding Iolaus in temporarily granted him his youth once more to fight Eurystheus. That story aside, the most prominent piece of information on Hebe was being the former cupbearer of the gods, and the wife of the famous hero Heracles. According to Hestia, Hebe mostly kept to herself, choosing to stay in her temple most days that sat off to the side near her mother's grand temple. "As if I'd miss it. We've got a lot of work to do, brother, so don't mess it up." She waged her finger up at Hermes, who appeared amused by the action as her face puffed out like a chipmunk. "You get too carried away, and I won't let you make any silly mistakes." "Not today." Hermes appeared affronted at the notion. "I get carried away? Who's the one who forgets about personal space when things heat up?" The goddess appeared affronted by his claim, and fired back, "It's not that bad. Don't be so dramatic, Hermes. Last time, you punched me in the eye." "Oh, that was a love tap at best. How is it my fault you bruise like a peach?" "Learn to dodge, Mr. Fastest God on Olympus." The dark-haired god turned to his blonde brother, and motioned, "Can you believe this?" Next to them, Apollo snorted, "She's right, you know. You do bruise like a peach. I can second that, and I can third that. You bruise pretty easily for a member of our family." Two new voices spoke up, and Naruto soon found himself staring at the final two members of Apollo's party. The first was male and stood the tallest in the room by at least a couple of inches. His shoulders were significantly broader than his own, with a deep tan and scarred hands like an old-time fisherman. His hair was black, and tied into a bun similar to Apollo, though unlike the sun god, had a fair amount of dark stubble across his face. The jacket he wore was open too, revealing he wasn't wearing a shirt beneath and showing off his well-kept body. The second person was a woman, with long hair that was kept free from any braid or ponytail, hanging loosely down her back like a beautiful curtain of wheat gold. Her eyes were a shade of green, though much lighter than the man next to her. While his eyes were the color of the sea, hers were more of a mossy shade. A gold bracelet shaped like a laurel sat on her left wrist, while a small pair of earrings shaped like poppies dangled from her ears. She appeared older than Hebe, and was equally as attractive. "Triton, Despoina." The excitement in her cousin's voice was enough to make the Despoina giggle at his reaction. Hebe was the first one to cross the room, grabbing her in a tight hug, while Apollo and Hermes greeted their elder cousin from the sea. He was a rarity to see the son of Poseidon outside of his father's realm. Compared to his Olympian cousins, Triton took his duties bequeathed to him by his father as serious as a god could, and rarely took days off. Although not an Olympian, Triton was respected by most, with many believing it was his work ethic Athena tried to emulate during her days as a younger and inexperienced goddess. Many tended to forget it was Triton who kept a watch over her when she first arrived. There was stability with Triton that few gods in their pantheon could claim to possess. Not to mention, when he had a few of Dionysus's wines in him, he loosened up and became the life of the party. "Sorry if we're a little late." The god's voice was notably deeper than his cousin's and nodded his head towards the goddess next to him idly chatting away with Hebe. "I ran into this one, who was gushing over some baked bread in a nearby bakery a few blocks over. Nah, it's cool, we just got here too." "Hello, Triton." This time, Hebe turned to her older cousin and laughed as she found herself hooking her arms around his neck and dangling off the front of his body without a care in the world. Said god tried to look annoyed but was failing miserably. Despoina embraced her two cousins, before asking, "Still no Dionysus then?" The god of wine and youngest Olympian was a regular member of their group, though was sadly unable to play as of late due to defying his father and not being able to control his urges. "Nah, no luck. I tried to convince Dad to give him a pass for one day, but you know what my old man is like," Apollo explained, shivering at the memory of his father glaring at him for bringing the subject up again. He tried every time they all got together, but his father wouldn't budge. Why did Dionysus have to go after that nymph? Even Apollo, the biggest ladies' man on Olympus, would refrain from seducing someone declared off limits by Zeus. "Well, he's only got himself to blame," Triton added, before finally taking note of the third blonde in the room standing patiently off to the side as they had their conversation. "Who's the mortal?" it came out quietly, watching as Naruto wore a patient smile as the rest of the newcomers took note of him. "A menace to society," Hermes muttered, though felt Apollo wedge his elbow into his side. "That's Mr. Uzumaki. He generously let us borrow his diner for the day." Naruto nodded their way. "Please, just call me Naruto, and did you know," Triton added and made a swell motion with his fingers. "Use the mist." Triton nodded. "Of course. I wrapped this place so thick in the mist people will be walking past it without so much as batting this place a glance. It'll cover our conversations too with him, so we don't need to worry about stepping on any glass." The older god seemed pleased. "Good. I would hate to have a repeat of Mulligan's Steakhouse. That was 4 years ago, and I didn't know she was clear-sighted." As the three boys conversed, Hebe and Despoina took it upon themselves to walk over and greet the smiling blonde. Of course, like everyone else in their family, they'd heard the rumors floating around this place. The daughter of Demeter heard all about it from Persephone after one of their many afternoon tea sessions with their mother on the balcony of her temple. Her sister never spoke about any mortal business in such high regard before, and though Demeter initially appeared interested, said interest waned when Persephone mentioned how much Hades enjoyed it. For Hebe, it was a similar scenario, though for her it came from the lips of Artemis, during one of the monthly gatherings at Hester's hearth between the goddesses. Any mortal that could make the goddess of the moon swoon and praise him was enough for her to investigate. "Sorry for their loudness. I'm afraid the boys in our family don't know the volume of their voices," Despoina apologized. "Some of the women too." The blonde smiled at the pair. "That's okay. I take it this is your first time to the Fox's Den." "It is, yes." From beneath the counter, Naruto pulled out a small stack of menus and handed one to each of the women. "Here, take one of these and see if there's anything you fancy on them. Since you'll likely be here for most of the day, you can order whatever you want, whenever you want. I'll be sitting here at the counter while you're in the middle of your—" He paused, before adding, "game." Both girls looked at each other, and broke out into giggles. "Apollo didn't tell you much, did he?" The blonde shook his head. "Nothing at all." Apollo appeared between the two goddesses, wrapping his arms over their shoulders and grinned at Naruto. "Yo, do you think we could get some of those milkshakes I had the last time I was here? Those were the best." He looked over his shoulders. "Triton, Hermes, you guys want a milkshake? They're amazing." "I'll take a strawberry." That came from Hermes, who took his place around the table. His backpack was on his lap, unzipping the top and grabbing a few items out from inside. On the opposite side, Triton did the same, and replied with, "Mint for me. If you have it, you got it." Apollo nudged his sister and cousin. "Ladies, a vanilla milkshake would be nice." "I haven't had a milkshake in forever," Despoina replied, a pout forming her face. "Mother never lets me have one where we're together," which is all the time. She loved Demeter Diri, but the goddess of the harvest was too clingy and fussy. She was a grown goddess, she could make her own choices. "I think I will have an Oreo milkshake, thank you very much," Hebe answered, giving the menu a quicker skim before settling on her choice. "And I'll have a chocolate milkshake." Naruto gave a small salute. "All right, I'll have those ready for you shortly. Why don't you guys go start your game, and I'll bring them over to you." With that, Naruto disappeared into the back room to begin the preparations. Meanwhile, the 5 gods made their way to the tables, and each took their places. "And we're done," Naruto muttered to himself, crouched down by one of the tables in the kitchen as he lowered the final cherry delicately on top of the whipped cream floating on the surface of the chocolate milkshake. Together, 5 milkshakes of equal height with the classic red and white striped straws were carefully lifted until perfectly balanced on the tips of his fingers. Not too shabby if I say so myself. Pushing the door open, he and re-entering the main room, he wasn't sure what he was expecting to find. Maybe they were playing a board game, Monopoly or something. They all had large bags with them, so anything was possible. He wondered if Talia had played any and if he should get some for them to play in the evenings. Instead, what he found nearly made him stumble from the absurdity of what he was witnessing. At some point, someone, probably Apollo, must have closed the blinds and turning the lighting down. Across the tables he and Apollo put together, black cloth covered them, notepads and various sized dice splayed out in front of the players. Apollo, who was seated at the table not attached to the larger arrangement, was sat with a dark cloak covering his body, the hood pulled up to cover the top half of his face. A cardboard screen was up to shield whatever objects and notes he had laid out in front of him. "Welcome travelers," Apollo spoke as he stood up and looked across the players in front of him. "Welcome to this week's game. As always Apollo, will be your dungeon master. One quick announcement, like I said earlier, the Diabolical 5 will be without Wisteriax, the tiefling sorcerer. As we all know, D couldn't keep it in his pants and can't join us until I managed to crack Dad, around the U-shaped table. The other members of the party, or the Diabolical 5 as he learned, nodded their heads. Each one had a change of attire, and each one of them looked like they belonged with King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. The first he looked at was Hebe, who now had her hair tied up in a bun, and dressed in some form of grey armor with a blue scarf lightly wrapped around her neck. Hermes appeared to be wearing a bright purple shirt and brown pants, with a flute hanging from his belt and his hair slicked back. A white waistcoat sat over the shirt, and he wore something akin to a smirk, or a grin. He couldn't tell which. Despoina, meanwhile, was dressed in robes of various shades of green, orange and brown. On her head sat a crown of thorns along with a wooden staff in her left hand. To finish it off, Triton had removed his jacket, and a Viking-like helmet sat on his head. A large axe sat on his back. "Are you guys playing Dungeons and Dragons?" he asked, disbelief very evident in his voice. "Sure am," Apollo said, breaking character as he ushered Naruto forward, his eyes lingering on the milkshakes on the tray. Walking over and handing everyone their shake, he watched as Apollo brought it up to his mouth and took a long swig as the frothy goodness ran down the back of his throat. "Oh man, that's the stuff." Hum. The hum came from Hebe, who beneath the table was kicking the air with her short legs. "It's so good." A milkshake mustache coated the top of her lips, and plucked the cherry from the top of the cream. "How's your Despoina?" The goddess didn't say anything. Her expression was one of bliss, her vanilla milkshake overpowering her in a way she hadn't expected. "Yeah, it's pretty good, I guess," Hermes muttered. He couldn't deny how good the beverage was, though he still kept an eye on the blonde from the corner of his eyes. He didn't want to leave himself open. Triton, who sat opposite the god of messengers, nodded in agreement. The Prince of the Sea thought it was the best milkshake he'd ever had. "So," Naruto started, his mind finally catching up to him, "you guys do this often? When you said you were going to play games, I thought you meant Monopoly or Cluedo." "We tried that, but it got violent very quickly," Triton answered, with Naruto noticing they all turned to stare at Hebe, who huffed and crossed her arms. "Someone doesn't take losing well. I told you all time and time again, don't touch Park Lane and Mayfair. Those are my squares," the goddess of youth shot back. "You didn't own them at the time, which means it's all free real estate. You were just angry that I managed to bankrupt you, cause you built hotels on them, which was my plan. We can all get very competitive," Despoina added, her smile returning and gently sipping from the straw in the corner of her mouth, and laughed as Hebe blew Raspberry Triton's way, some more than others. Looking back up at him, Despoina asked, "Have you ever played, Mr. Uzumaki?" With that question, everyone turned and looked at him, shaking his head, and rubbing the back of his neck. Naruto replied with, "I haven't. I don't know much about the game, to be honest. All I know is that it was popular back in the 80s. I think I've seen books on it in local bookshops and the dice. We started playing the game about 5 years ago, and we haven't played much else since. It's very immersive, though we don't get to play as often as we'd like. Our professions and responsibilities tend to get in the way." She put her milkshake down, and Naruto found himself surprised as her voice suddenly changed into one of smooth elegance. "My name is Anaraksha, a druid half elf and primary healer for the group." She nudged Hermes and gave him a look to follow suit. Sighing, the male god cleared his throat and made his voice sound higher pitched. "The name's Rolf, a bard gnome and the best damn flute player you'll ever see. Nice to meet you." Next, it was Hebe's turn, who stood up and laid her fist on her chest. "I'm Lena, I'm human, and I'm the Hebe side," and whispered, "the cleric." Naruto took note of how unhappy she sounded about it, and her lips stuck out in a pout. "You don't sound happy about it," he commented, and heard everyone else in the party snort. Hebe sat back down in a huff and crossed her arms. The youngest looking member was proving to possess a bit of a temper. "She's not. Every other campaign we've played, she always picks a barbarian or a fighter. She never allocates herself as the healer," Apollo replied, lacing his fingers behind his head and looking over at his half-sister. "So we told her she had to suck it up and be the cleric of the group." "So the cleric is a healer?" Everyone nodded. "Then why is," he looked over at Despoina, "Anaraksha your primary?" Again, everyone looked at Hebe, who stuck her tongue out and grinned. Triton, who had a small bead of mint-flavored milkshake running down his beard, went on to explain, "Clerics have to pick domains to align their abilities with and pick a god to serve as their patron. They're holy warriors, to be blunt. Hebe here picked the war domain, which makes her suitable for both healing support and fighting. Guess which she chooses to focus on, and it's a good thing I did. How many times have I saved your sorry butts? Hebe spoke, eyes full of passion. I'm a warrior at heart. I belong on the front line just like Tirug. And Wisty reacts, yes, of course, Tirug, Naruto asked, though it wasn't too hard to figure out. Putting down his milkshake, Triton was the final member to stand up. He put on a low voice, like waves smashing against a stone beach. I am the one they call Tirug. He lifted the plastic axe and put it on his shoulder. I'm the half-Goliath barbarian of this group, and the primary ass-kicker and skull-crusher. Need monsters to kill. I'm your man. He grinned and stuck his tongue out at Hebe, who returned the gesture. If the blonde shinobi had to guess, the daughter of the king and queen preferred to play the barbarian. That's the group. Apollo looked up at him from his seat behind the table. We have one more, but he was grounded by our dad, and put on house arrest. Maybe you'll get to meet him in the future. Maybe, Naruto replied. So you guys do this often? When we have time, but we try to do it once a month if we can. The blonde nodded. All right, in that case, I'll leave you guys to play. If you need anything, I'll be sitting by the counter, making sure everyone around the table had a menu should they decide they wanted anything. Naruto made way to the counter, and took his seat. He had a book to read for the afternoon, but something told him he didn't want to miss what was about to unfold in front of him. Watching the group play their game was an experience he was unlikely to forget anytime soon. He knew of the game, but he'd never seen it played before. From what he understood, it was an action role-playing game, with one person acting as the narrator of the story, or campaign in this case, while the rest would play characters they created. They went in depth, like their character's history, personality likes and dislikes. He couldn't speak for anyone else who played the game, but the 5 gods around the table appeared very passionate and committed to the game. 3 hours in, and his book remaining untouched, Naruto found himself leaning on his elbows as he watched them. As you guys push on further northward for another 2 hours through the ever-changing grass, you begin to notice the color of the grass begin to shift and change the further north you go, Apollo described, looking across the room with his fingers laced in front of him. Starting from the deep verdant green we're all familiar with, it changes into a maroon, purplish color. What's up with this field? Hermes chittered away, feigning surprise as he looked around the room. It's like some big kaleidoscope. I would like to pop Henry out of my bracelet, Hebe added and tapped her wrist. Nodding, Apollo made a whooshing sound and began describing Hebe's pet wolf appearing. Henry appears on the field, and started sniffing around. Nose to the ground, you all watch as Henry walks over to a small patch of daisies, and begins rolling over the flowers with his body. AWW, Henry likes all the flowers. Hebe raised her hand and pretended to pat a creature that wasn't there. The only one who didn't look amused out of the bunch was Despoina, who lunged forward in her seat, her arms out wide. A frantic look was on her face, her crown of thorns threatening to topple off her head. Don't do that, you'll make the field angry. She pretended to get in front of the make-believe wolf, her arms going wild. It'll be angry for weeks. It might try and hurt us. Triton and Hermes looked confused and amused, while Hebe frowned at her cousin. She pretended to hug her make-believe wolf while saying, Anna, do not yell at my wolf, I was trying to protect him. Afterwards, Apollo begins to describe Henry the wolf rolling through the grass again, with everyone watching as Despoina's expression relaxed and stared at Apollo. Does it seem angry? No, it's all fine. The field carries on as normal. Oh, it went silent for a moment, everyone looking at the blonde goddess and waited for her response. They didn't have long to wait before Despoina's face turned into a mask of fury, as her feet repeatedly stamped on the ground. Suck it, grass. The moment you say that, the grass goes from a purplish maroon into a deep red. Hermes dropped his head into his hands, while Despoina looked like a fish out of the water. Oh God, what did you do? I don't know. You said everything was fine, she accused Apollo, pointing at him with an annoyed expression. I said it was fine for a wolf to roll on the grass. I didn't say it was okay to flat out insult the field, Apollo reasoned with. As all of you begin to continue forward, you find the grass is getting denser the further you go and begins catching on your ankles. You're all close to falling over a few times, but you manage to catch yourself. You get the distinct feeling the field wants you gone. Triton sighed, looking at his half-sister with a tired expression. You turned a field against us. Good job. He turned to Apollo. Do we have to fight it? That's up to you. I could torch the field. I think I've got a casket of oil in my bag of holding. From across the room, Naruto watched in fascination. It was preposterous, and yet it was happening in front of him. No, don't do that. Hebe looked over at Apollo. I jump on Tirug and cover his face with my hands, stopping him from taking out the casket. Triton flailed his arms around. Ah, get off me, you pitiful excuse of a cleric, being the only silent one, as Despoina started doing some strange dance to try and calm down the field. Hermes let out a low sigh, and got Apollo's attention. I'm going to try and reason with the field. He took a sip of water and cleared his throat. Lovely field. I apologize for the rudeness of my compatriots. We will be gentle as we meander our way through you. We will make as little of a mark on your magnificence as we can and enjoy the splendor of your ever-changing colors. You are majestic, you are windswept, you are everything I could hope for in a field of your radiance. It was a delight to set foot on your soil, and thank you for taking such good care of us. Apollo tried to hold in his laughter, as did Naruto, before asking Ralph, please make a persuasion check against the grass, while adding the D10 inspiration die. Shall do. Prepare to thank me for saving you all again. Hermes picked up one of the die and rolled it across the table. He pondered over it for a moment before he looked back at Apollo. 12, your parley with the field was unsuccessful. Fuck. You rolled a 2, Hebe questioned, glancing over at his dice. Hey, we all have bad rolls from time to time. Now let's get the hell out of this field before we piss it off any more than we have. I think I need some cake. Despoina muttered and motioned Naruto over. Could I get some lemon bars please? A short while later, and a couple of empty plates extra, Naruto once again found himself staring quizzically at the fivesome. If anyone was passing by the fox's den at this moment, he could only imagine what their reaction was going to be after hearing the exaggerated screams of the son of the sea. The party of 4 successfully made it through the field without angering the rainbow-colored meadow further and found themselves traveling through a narrow pathway that led up towards the mountain. However, before they could get very far, Apollo described a golem made of stone blocking their path and refusing to allow them passage. Hebe, being the practical joker of the group, decided to use a technique called polymorph and turned the golem into something else entirely. Will someone please get this thing away from me? Triton shouted, holding up a plastic shield as he pretended to get knocked back by an invisible creature, whose plan was it to polymorph the golem into a giant squirrel. You know I don't like squirrels, they have it out for me. He made a bunch of nonsensical noises, which were soon followed by, stop standing there and help me. Hermes stared over at his half-sister since Hebe was the one who cast polymorph on the golem. Why did you turn it into a squirrel? You knew what the outcome was going to be. This is the 4th time it's happened this campaign, and it gets funnier every time it happens, Hebe replied, trying not to laugh at the nonsensical babbling coming from Triton. You'd think he was fighting Rotosk, Despoina added, focusing partly on the scene in front of her, while happily nomming away on a lemon bar. A squirrel that size would get problematic. I don't know how Frey and the others deal with such an annoying creature, Apollo added, watching his cousin in amusement. It was always good to see his serious cousin of the sea get into role-playing, and act like someone the polar opposite. I know Artie had been half tempted to hunt it down on a few occasions. Die, die, die. The sea god swung the shield around like a bat. Help me. Is anyone brave enough to jump in and help your poor barbarian? Apollo asked, sitting there in amusement as his cousin got bested by a giant squirrel. Otherwise, this could take a while. Lena, Hermes and Despoina said, looking at Hebe, who appeared to be enjoying the sight immensely. Her shoulders were shaking up and down with Triton's shouts and screams tickling her funny bone. Did you have to make it so big? It was funny, Hebe shrugged, but felt the eyes of everyone else bore into her. Oh fine, I'll turn it into something smaller. She waved a hand in the air. I use polymorph again. What do you turn it into? The goddess of youth shrugged. No idea. How about a snail? He nodded, with a wave of her hand. Lena uses polymorph one more time and altered the form of the squirrel. You all watch as the body of the furry critter shudders for a moment, before it shrinks in size and takes on a new shape. What's left in its place is an ordinary snail, one that immediately begins slowly moving towards Tirug. The sun god described as Triton let out a sigh of relief, before glaring over at Hebe. Are you all happy now? Hebe asked in character, before turning to Triton. Come on, you big baby, let's get going. We have a dragon to kill at the peak of that mountain. That thing will stay in that form for an hour, so let's get away from here and conserve our strength. My weapon is burning for some real action. Here's your coffee, Naruto offered, lowering a mug of freshly brewed goodness next to Triton. I added a splash of coconut in there as you asked, and didn't add any sugar. Thank you, Triton replied, taking it eagerly in his hands and taking small sips, trying to avoid burning his tongue. The content hum was low and gave a series of nods, I can see why this place is so popular. I'm beginning to wonder if I should tell my mother about this place. She's been looking for more reasons to frequent New York, and if she knew this place existed, then she would stop by every visit. In that case, I'll have to keep an eye out for her. If you like, you can take a menu with you to show her. I'm still trying to figure out the whole website thing. It was an idea Hestia had offered him. He liked the idea of putting up a website for the Fox's Den so people could view the menu without having to come in. Plus it would give people a way to book the place out for events and alike. He wasn't the most tech-savvy people out there in that regard. I just might